Good afternoon. We will call to order the January 22nd, 2014 Impact Fee Update Workshop of the Indian County Board of County Commissioners. At this point, would everyone please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Actually, this meeting probably really needs a prayer.
Maybe, do we want to adjust the agenda, gentlemen, add an invocation for this? Or,
The Lord knows we need the guidance.
that was Commissioner Zork's comment. We might need one for today. We'll go ahead and move on into presentations. And at this point, I'm going to ask the Community Development Director, Mr. Stan Bowling, to kick it off and give us the staff overview, and then he's going to introduce the other members of his team as well as the consultant team. So with that, Stan, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Stan Bowling, County Community Development Director. I do want to go ahead and introduce the staff that are up front here. Phil Matson, MPO Director, Jason Brown, Management and Budget, and myself. And Chris Moore is available as well from Public Works. Those folks have had a lot of input and provide a lot of information to the consultant. Tyndall Oliver, consultant team, is here. Steve Tyndale and Egan Camp, and they'll be addressing you here shortly. We also have some representatives from municipalities that are certainly involved with the impact fee and participating in the impact fees, as well as school board. And we also have staff taking sign-in sheets to try to find out who the participants are here, but more importantly, to get their email addresses to add them to our email list that we send out information to. But all the information that you all have presented and will be presented in the future is available on the county website, so that information is available to the public. With that, I'll give a little bit of a background for the workshop. A little bit of impact fee history. In 1986, countywide traffic impact fee ordinance was adopted. And so we had traffic impact fees first, and those impact fees were updated in 1997 and in 2004. Then in 2005, Tyndall Oliver performed an impact fee study, which was approved, and an ordinance and fee schedules were adopted for traffic, and then also 8 non-traffic impact fees. And at that point in time, the county entered into agreements with each municipality and the school board for those fees and collecting those fees and administering them. And those agreements are still in effect. So we do have agreements that are still in effect. The non-traffic fees are EMS, fire, correctional facilities, public buildings, law enforcement, libraries, solid waste, parks and recreation, and school facilities. In 2009, 5 impact fees were temporarily suspended for a total of 1 year due to the economic downturn. And one of the conditions for anyone pulling a permit with the suspended fees was to actually do construction and get a CO, certificate of occupancy, within 18 months. And I can tell you that in every instance since 2009, we've had compliance 100% with that condition. The suspended fees at that time were EMS, fire, corrections, public buildings, law enforcement, and solid waste, and that reduced all fee categories. In 2009 also, an impact fee update was done mostly by staff. We used some credit and trip length information from a 2007 study by Duncan and trip rates from the 8th edition ITE, and updated the fee schedule, and that was adopted, and that reduced most fee categories. In 2010, the 5 fee suspension was extended a year. And then in 2011, only 3 of the fees were suspended, and that was done as well in 2012. And that was the last time the fees were suspended. And in fact, the 3 fees that are suspended now, corrections, public buildings, and solid waste, that suspension will end in March 31st unless it's extended by the board. And in 2 weeks, staff will be coming to you all to recommend that you allow us to extend the impact fees until the new fee schedule is done. That way we have kind of continuity there. Just to briefly show you what the effect of the reductions since the 2005 schedule, all of these reductions here are showing in comparison to the 2005. And for a single-family home between 1,500 and 2,500 square feet in 2005, was a little over $10,000. And with the 2009 schedule, that was reduced somewhat. With the 5 fee suspensions, it was reduced more. And currently, we're at about 11 to 12% less than the 2005 rate. But as you can see from retail, bank, drive-in, and industrial, there's been more of a reduction with the temporary suspensions for the non-residential. And you see those fees have dropped quite a bit since the 2005 schedule was adopted. In terms of the proportions of impact fees for residential, about half of the total fees come from traffic and about 20% from schools. Non-residential is quite a bit different. Traffic is by a much larger component. 75 to 95% of those total fees come from traffic, and then kind of a distant second, fire EMS, 2 to 11%. So traffic has more of an effect, is a larger proportion of the non-residential fees. For road project revenues, we have a number of revenue sources you all are familiar with, and what I really wanted to point out here was that even with our long-range transportation plan for 2035, we're looking at impact fees to make up about 31% of the projected revenues. So transportation traffic impact fees, very important part of our revenue function for road projects. In 2013, Tyndall Oliver was hired to conduct an update of all 9 impact fees, to look at the formulas, use the best available data, update the land and construction costs and the credits, and review the level of service for the 8 non-traffic fees. The level of service standard for traffic is remaining the same. And they're also given the direction to provide alternatives for reducing non-residential impact fees, and in fact given direction from the board to try to look at coming up with a schedule that reduces non-residential fees while minimizing or avoiding increases to residential fees and providing adequate revenues to maintain level of service. I think the consultant has done that with the initial report. The purpose of today's workshop is to consider the initial report from Tyndall Oliver, discuss the formula assumptions and the fee reduction alternatives, and to provide some direction. Now, this is just the first part, really, of this whole effort to update and give some alternatives for our impact fees. Going forward from this workshop, there'll be follow-up on the direction that you all give, and there could be an additional workshop conducted, not only to follow up on whatever direction you all have, but to really drill down into the next level, which we'll probably we'll probably look at implementation issues. We also will be coordinating with school board staff and the consultant especially to kind of refine information that they've gotten and to go over that. Right now, for evaluation purposes, the school impact fee is just shown as remaining the same. We haven't gotten all the information refined on that yet, and we will do that going forward and work with school board staff on that. The next step will also identify changes to the comprehensive plan and the fee ordinance, and a lot of our implementation issues will be done at that stage and address things such as appeals or individual assessments and some of the items that we've discussed in the past. There'll be a final report and a proposed fee schedule, and then we have 2 public hearings that are arranged for adoption. So all told, we have today's workshop, we could have an additional workshop, and then 2 public hearings, really 4 public meetings, and time to kind of work through all these issues and make sure that you all, the final ordinance that you all see will have essentially a first reading and the ability to make changes then. Today's focus is really on what's covered by the initial report, the data, the assumptions, the methodology, the affordable growth approach, and some of the policy decisions for buying down or subsidizing certain impact fee categories or types. So for the workshop today, in a moment I'd like to hand it over to the consultant for their presentation to explain what's in the report, to take questions from the board, and then take questions from the public, and then wrap up and get board direction. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to the consultant, Steve Tyndall.
And Steve, just we'll try to maintain order here, but with this group, it's kind of like herding cats. So they might not be able to control themselves and just blurt a question out in the middle. So just give you a heads up to be prepared for that.
And I've seen some of these tables, and they're mighty exciting.
Nice spreadsheets, huh, Bob?
Yeah. Commissioner Sori's a big spreadsheet fan, so anytime you can work in a spreadsheet, he'll get He'll get pretty excited. And if you nickname the spreadsheet Jackie, he'll get really engaged.
I think I used the word Lotus spreadsheet, and everybody looked at me like, what are you talking about versus Excel? So I think Lotus was the first one.
Chair, if I could ask you a question just to kind of get an idea of
Here we go.
how well, I want to know,
That's a new record.
is timeline, how long will it take you to make your presentation uninterrupted? And obviously, as we interrupt that, we'll add to it. I want to make sure we have adequate time for the public participation, and also, I have kind of a laundry list of scenario and questions which I've kind of reviewed preliminarily with Stan. I could use the whole 4 hours myself, but there's 5 of us, so that wouldn't be fair. But
Yeah, do the workshop for questions, Commissioner, so
It sounds like Commissioner Zorka, you're going to be alone for some time.
after 5, yeah, I'll be here. I'll stay all night.
Yeah, if I talk faster than I should, probably 25 minutes, and if I
Okay.
talk slowly like I should, it'd probably be 40 minutes. And I'm going to
Okay.
try to slow down and go over the slides fairly
Okay.
comprehensive. So somewhere between 20 and 45 minutes in terms of our
Okay.
communications.
Okay, and then just, Steve, you can make sure that microphone is good in front of you.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
And go ahead with the first slide. We're going to go over the methodology of the,
It might be too close.
Do you have any more? Is this what you're fixing to go through?
yes,
Do you have any more of these for the public, by chance?
we brought about, I don't know, 10, 15 copies.
Can we get some maybe run while they're doing it, since we're, some have it and some don't.
Okay, just
We can make copies and we'll have it posted.
Who else, by raise of hands, wants a copy of the presentation data? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
make about...
maybe a dozen?
Yeah,
20.
a dozen of them.
So we're going to go over the methodology first, and then go over the findings. And when we do the findings, we're going to go for transportation first. It's a huge part of the fees, and probably the most complicated, and then go through the other fees. I'm going to do the transportation, and Nilgun's going to do the other ones as we go through the presentation, and then talk about your next steps. By definition, the impact fee is a one-time charge to new development. It covers the cost of that new development. It should implement a capital improvement program. The cost needs to be proportional to the impact, and we don't charge the developer twice. So if the developer pays the fee and you charge a tax for the same service, then we call what's called a credit, and reduce the fee by that amount of money that specific development is going to generate for capital in the future. Why impact fees? And you're going to see what I call the affordable growth curve, or level service curve. It's all about level service and providing service to the community, and that's the reason for the fees. It basically calculates the cost of what a unit growth costs you to provide the capital investment. Issues in many communities, for one of the reasons they do it is if you have a very large development, just sit around and try to negotiate rather than having a predefined number is very useful in terms of development approval. And most needed when you're growing, of course, and when you have limited funding, and communities are finding more and more restrictions in terms of future funding. So that's the background for why I have impact fees. Our fees, we use the word consumption-based. We charge for consuming an asset that you're providing to the development community. We also have what we call affordable growth strategy, or a level service strategy, and it's based on future growth rates and your ability to take existing revenues and absorb growth with existing revenues without degrading level service. And you have some ability with taxes to absorb growth. And this, you'll see this curve in the analysis, and the intent is to show you where you can maintain a level service and the option between growth paying it or having taxes pay it in terms of growth. With a slower growth rate, you're much more able to do that. When you're growing at 7 or 8% a year, you'll see where that strategy just doesn't work because of the phenomenal growth rate we used to experience. We're also going to talk about, rather than just maintaining the level service with a second revenue, that you can choose and pick the reduction of the fees and still maintain a level service rather than giving an across-the-board reduction. And this is something we've generated in the last maybe 5 years, and we've been through many hours with our legal group getting good understanding of what we're doing to where we don't have any issue with the legal part of it. So the findings of the technical study, and we wanted to give you a kind of, this is the end results, and then my presentation will be about how we got there. A lot of times it's good to know what the conclusions are And then when we're giving our presentation, you can see what happened to get us there. Well, your current fee schedule, is that feedback with me?
Your mic is a little too close, Mr. Daniel.
Am I getting the feedback?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have the current fee schedule for, I think, about 7 uses right on this list. Our calculated fee summary in terms of just a technical calculation, and this is what we think you can charge. And to be honest with you, if you charge this and continue to spend some taxes, you could actually improve your level of service with the taxes. But that's the number we've come up with each one of them. You can see the single family could go up 14 to multifamily 22, and then you see quite a range of variation in the technical calculated update based on current data and current information. A lot of that's changing in the demand per use, cost, et cetera, for different fees. This is the second option we've come up with, and that is basically if you want to maintain your level of service and you're willing to reduce the fees because you are spending taxes in the future for capital. This is the strategy we've come up with, what we call our affordable growth strategy. And you can see there that the single family and the residential are about the same, a little increase. And then if you take the future investment you're making and buy down non-residential and still maintain your level of service, when we put that money towards a non-residential, you see a major reduction in those categories. I'll suggest to you that most clients I've worked to have been pretty selective with that buy down than just non-residential. It's been high wage, specific uses, et cetera. But this is just buying down all non-residential with that second credit, the taxes you're going to collect in the future and build capital, and subsidize or buying down non-residential uses. So those are the two numbers. One's a technical number that we think you could charge, and if you do some of your service areas, you would actually let development pay for existing level services, let your taxes actually increase the level of service over time. The second one is if you use all of the money you're going to collect in the future and invest in capital and use it subsidized, you'll maintain your level of service for each one of your different service areas, but you'll reduce specifically what we call your most favorable uses. And right now we've got all non-residential being bought down. So those are the two kind of end results after all the calculations. And now what we're going to do is present to you the details of each one of the different areas and what created these final outcomes. We're going to start with transportation. It's your it is your most expensive asset. We're talking about an asset that's worth billions, not millions of dollars. It's the most expensive to replace and to maintain the level of service, and it's one of your largest assets. This is a list of what's been built since the last study. That's a combination of taxes and impact fees. And this is a list of what you're going to bill. What we like to talk about when we talk about fees or taxes is not whether you like something, but whether you want to bill something and commit to this. So all these options we're going to show you are there to where you can bill those projects. The equation itself, we figure out the demand of each different type of development, what it costs to provide that development, the service, what it's going to consume in value. We calculate any and all capital, taxes, or revenues that it's going to generate. We bring it back to present worth because they pay a bill when they pull a permit, but you send them a bill either when they pump gas or annually on their tax bill. That's still a bill for capital, so we credit that development. And so the fee by definition is the difference between the future tax revenue for capital, and there's a lot of discussion about, I generate revenue, but this is capital revenue. And so this fee is basically the difference between the two, what development consumes, what it costs, what it's going to absorb in terms of your asset, crediting all tax revenues that development is going to generate and saying this is the difference. If we want to maintain our level of service, then this is the fee we need to charge you. This graphic just shows you the variations in the data. The state law requires you to use most recent data, and whether the data goes up or down or demand goes up and down, the law now says you will use most recent data. So there's a real question now whether you want to blend old data and new data. We think we take the new data and that you need to move forward with it in terms of the different information, both in terms of demand side, your cost side, and your projected revenues. What you see here for the single-family home, for a residential at about 2,000 square foot, the actual fees drop down 5% using the new data. The cost component, we look at your local roadway improvements and what you've built and what you're building and your estimates. We have recent construction and lane additions throughout the state. I think we have something like 14 counties we monitor, and we have a tremendous database. We look at all the state. Counties and cities don't build a lot of things, so we try to look at a larger database to get a good sample size. We've got a fabulous database in terms of cost, both for construction costs, right-of-way costs, and trends statewide, and then we look at every piece of data we can to find out how it varies within this county. This is a curve that we've shown since 2005. You can see the peak there at 05, 06, 07. This is a roadway construction cost trend and an urban construction cost from our statewide database. You can see where we peaked 06, 07. To be honest with you, I never could figure out where the income and the revenues weren't going up, but costs were going up, and we all know that we were spending money we didn't have. But you can see the peak. You can see that we've leveled off 08, 09, and again, this is statewide. The trend now in 11 and 12, and it's finally happened, we're seeing an edge upward. As it varies a little bit by different parts of the state. Your construction cost and the information we looked at is below our average and what we've seen statewide, and we checked and we rechecked. And so we're using about 80% of what we would expect we would have come in and found with our data set, because you have achieved some reasonable cost construction prices. So we think this is conservative. If that trend continues, it'll be nice, because you have achieved it. We're using it to where we don't overestimate what it costs in terms of providing the service to new development. So you can see that little circle in terms of our data point, what we've used, because we're really leaning on local data for the construction cost. This is a statewide trend in terms of state roadways. Again, we have a database for every district, and we have a database for this district with multiple projects. You see some of the same trends, the peak. You see the valley coming out. You see some tapering off, and you see where we are. The same token, because you've experienced some local construction lower than average, we're doing the same thing. We're saying that the state roads are going to be 80% of what we usually would expect. And we, again, to be conservative in terms of what we're using to estimate your future costs. This is just a pie chart showing after you blend everything together, urban, construction, rural. We looked at the types of roads, where they're going to be in your right-of-way. And this is a pie chart showing you how we come up with $2.6 million. I think our numbers in most other counties are somewhere between $3 and $3.5 million. So this number is significantly lower than, to be honest with you, I thought we were going to see when we started this project, 6 months ago. So I think we are being reasonably conservative with your construction costs, and we are doing counties all over the state that are having higher numbers than this number, but this is a number. Same thing with the right-of-way. We're using a percentage, and we found the same effect. We found state about half the cost being right-of-way, and the counties about half. We saw the counties and state going up, the right-of-ways about equal to construction. And now we're seeing a trend where right-of-way is about 40% of construction, consistently, all the state right-of-way, because of just willingness to sell, lack of having to go through arbitration. Right-of-way is now back down to what the number we're showing here. We feel comfortable that you've kind of experienced that in this county, and we're seeing this whole process statewide. So we feel comfortable that this 2.6 is not overstating what it's going to cost you in the next years to build and construct roadways. We want to show the transportation is a very interesting, I know you've experienced the Avalon tax base and the ups and downs and going through that, and we got communities transitioning away from that, from assessment, et cetera. But this is just a graphic showing you the gas tax, which is, if you were in business, that your revenue source. This is go back to 1960, and it's showing 1 penny, and people hear 1 penny, they think of 1%. It's not 1%, it's 1 penny per gallon. And 1960 versus today, the gas tax is worth about 1/10 the value it was in 1960. A penny of gas, because of fuel efficiency, and it's a penny, not a percent, is worth 1/10. The other way I say this is, when Eisenhower passed a 4-cent gas tax for the interstate system, it's equivalent to a 40-cent gas tax. today. That's how deflated the gas tax is. The other comment I'll make to you, the state being notorious like it usually is, it has indexed its gas tax. It will not allow you to index your gas tax. So it's not like sales tax and all the rest of them, which have an inflation in it. Your gas tax doesn't change as cost goes up. It stays that way. So as inflation goes up and fuel efficiencies, that's how your gas tax is eroded. The other comment I'll make, if you look back about 15 years, our fuel efficiencies leveled off. And we really haven't had that erosion because of fuel efficiency. If you look at the next graphic, this is the past legislation recently, and that's about a 10-year period. As the fleet gets changed out, your fuel efficiencies are going to go up dramatically compared to the last 15 years, and that eroded gas tax, again, which is your primary source, is going to become less of a source. It's a major issue in terms of all the transportation issues. Take the combination of your local gas tax not being indexed, add inflation in, and then have the fleet change out like it is, and this is your projected revenue from gas tax. So that's where you're going to see a lot of conversation about going to other revenue sources and having to have some other alternative revenue for transportation. The credit component, it credits your fees for all travel, state, counties, city roads. You have an agreement with the cities. The revenue sources is all revenues, including state-funded projects in terms of the gas tax being passed, county-funded fuel, any sales tax you're projecting, all those are considered in the revenue. From our analysis, the state has, on the average, built more roads in this county than we've seen built in other counties. And I've done this for many years now, and we checked and we rechecked and rechecked. You are definitely getting your fair share of state road construction in terms of equivalent pennies being spent in this county. We checked historically what they've done, and we've checked what they're proposing to do, and you are getting significant state investment in this county, and we're giving credit for that future investment in terms of the gas tax credit. So this is basically, again, the current fee, and you can see the change in the fee by use. In terms of the numbers, we're showing that the calculated fee is about $4,400. I may also say at this time, and it's something maybe during the workshops we can talk about, this fee charges for level service D. And we did this since 1985. And when we put level service D in there, it means on the average, we're charging for level service D. And average means half is worse and half is better. It doesn't mean no road can be worse than D. If we plugged in there what you've actually achieved, these fees would be somewhere between $9,000 and $16,000. You will never maintain the system you've got now and your road system not degrade. You will never charge enough or generate enough revenue to do what you did in the 60s and 70s. So these fees are conservative, and they're based on slowing the degradation down, not maintaining what you've got. Now, this county has done a phenomenal job. Your system operates better than I've seen a lot of counties in terms of we've looked at the level service and you've invested in it. But this fee is not to maintain the system's performance as it is today, which is not a whole lot of roads operating D. You're actually charging at a rate to where the system will degrade without substantial taxes being put in. I just want to make that as a point. It was done that way because fees could not and would not ever have been accepted to charge for what you've achieved in the past. It's just too expensive. The affordable growth strategy, that's a new thing we've introduced, I think, in about the last 3 to 5 years. What we're doing here is taking the developer and giving the developer credit for the revenues they generate. But existing people pay that same tax. They pay gas tax or sales tax. So you do have other money than just the impact fee and the developer's money to pay for growth. What this does is that as you grow slower and that tax base is a higher percentage of what's available for growth, it gives that second, what I call the second credit, and maintain a level of service. To be honest with you, with all your other systems, it will maintain the number of square foot, the number of types of parks. For transportation, that second credit is going to allow it to grade at the same level, not maintain your current system performance, but it's still being used as a credit, as a buy down. So basically, the rate of growth has a huge effect on the ability to absorb growth with your tax base, and we're going to show you that. We usually like to take that second credit or that affordable growth credit to maintain level service, and our clients will buy down by area or by what we call most favored uses. From what we understand, you do not have a urban core, a development center, and you don't have an area you're really trying to redevelop in terms of economics. And at this point in time, there's no targeted areas. So we did not go to targeting areas. We have some communities that have targeted areas with a buy down rather than uses. So we moved from not doing the targeted area to targeting land uses, and we were asked just take non-residential, not a specific component of it. We have some communities that will only do TODs, high-wage industrial uses, et cetera, as a targeted use. We were asked to just show what you could buy down for non-residential uses. So that's what we were given. This is a curve, and I think we have 3 or 4 workshops. I've been doing government work since 1965. This is one of the most fascinating curves I think we've ever developed. And this is what it does. If you look out to the far right, and I've got a graph showing the state of Florida and this county was growing 7 or 8 or 9%. That was just a fact. You had a lower base, you had 300,000 people coming at it, and you're growing at 7 or 8%. The first line up there, that red line, is the calculated fee for development, for a unit of development. The blue line is the total cost for that development. The difference between those two is the credit we give that's generated by that projected development as future revenues that we're crediting. You can see it's 10, 15, 20%. I've seen credits go anywhere from 5, 10% up to maybe 15 or 20% in terms of capital. So that's the difference between the red and the blue. That's the developer's credit for their revenues. If you go out at 7 or 8% growth rate every year, and you take the current tax base, it absorbs almost nothing because you're growing so fast. As you grow slower and slower, and the magical number is about 2%, 2.5%. If you start slowing down to that level, and you've got some taxes, some legitimate taxes going to capital, all of a sudden existing revenues can start absorbing that growth. If you look at that curve, I call that a level service curve, that little green curve. What it says is that the slower you grow, you can take that base revenue and invest in capital and absorb growth and not deteriorate your level of service. Now, as you increase that credit, that curve will change dramatically. You can absorb faster. As you reduce that credit to zero, you can absorb no growth. So we can run multiple curves at different rates in terms of the investment, your tax base. But this curve shows you for transportation, your first reduction is about 20% from that 120 cents to the dollar. And then we show you the slower and slower you grow, the more that the current revenue sources can absorb that and maintain the level service D. And you can see that at that tax rate, when you hit about 1% growth, we can absorb it with the current tax base, the sales tax, gas tax, and what we projected. So that curve is basically a level service curve. Now, people say that you can't charge fees and improve the level service. I've not seen a court says yet that a community, once it passes an impact fee, can't decide to improve your level service with a tax. So basically what you're able to do, absorb the growth with your impact fee, and that would maintain the level service. And if you want to take a tax and improve it, you can. Now, if you do improve that level service for 4 or 5 years, guess what the fees are going to do gradually? They're going to go up. And they have a tend to do that. I've had communities that have passed impact fees. Matter of fact, you have. They passed the impact fees. They've collected it at the rate of the current standard. They passed the tax, and they improved the level of service. Well, when we look at the asset, it's more valuable. So if you want to quit spending taxes, the impact fee is going to go up. I've not had any judge say, once you pass the fee, you can't have any more taxes or you can't improve your level of service. You can't improve the level of service with the revenue from impact fees. You can with taxes. So that curve basically says you can pass an impact fee. You can drop down below it if you don't pass the impact fee and you got these taxes, if you're growing at a certain rate. Or if you pass that impact fee and you start growing slower, your level of service is going to improve. And what we're here today is that you choose. I think you have a right to choose. And that curve shows you what you can do for this one facility here, which is transportation.
Does that curve, Does that curve say then that you could have, at 1% growth or even up to 2% growth, you could have reduced impact fees to zero and there wouldn't have been any substantial difference because we would have paid for that out of different funds?
Yeah, what we're saying is that if you drop down well below 1%, and it was permanent
In growth.
pollution,
Right.
and the state kept spending its money, and you kept spending your money, that's the amount of money you have to absorb it. Matter of fact, I have a table in the back, we don't have it here, but it basically takes your billion-dollar transportation system, and it says, well, 0.5% of that's so many dollars. As long as you invest so many millions of dollars a year, you can absorb 0.5% growth, as long as it's taxes. And so that curve basically gives you your option to say you can pay with taxes, you can pay it with fee, you can improve your level service, or you can use neither and allow it to degrade. It's a level service curve. And that's what we're using to determine whether we can buy. What we don't want to do is buy down a certain use and not be able to maintain your level service. That would be illegal. If we discounted some uses at the expense of telling the developer, we're charging you for this level service, but this group of people are going to pay nothing, and your level service degrade, you're going to get sued. But as long as we're taking the taxes and we're showing it, and we don't want to improve the level service above that curve, we can take that money and buy down. And so this basically says that 2% growth rate, to be conservative, you could buy down these fees at what is it, about 60%. You could adopt at the 60% level.
Okay. I want to have a follow-up question on Wesley to see if I understand it the same way. So another way of saying it is you've got the purple line that goes down, and for moving towards 2% towards 1%, that area of blue is the area that has to be paid for by impact fees if you want to maintain the level of service.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
What area of blue?
There's a
Well,
when you
the
get
white.
the purple line,
Below the green line.
Yeah.
there's a blue area.
Right.
That would be the amount you'd have to pay for whatever you do with impact fees if you want to maintain the level of service.
Right.
And then once you get past the green line, that's the area that the other
Impact fees would
taxes he's
start-
talking about
Correct.
are paying
Right.
to maintain the level of service.
Right. That's absolutely perfect. And basically that's, and sometimes we put the word level of service curve in there, affordable, and that's what that is. And to be honest with you, with the closed systems like parks and schools and all, which is a capital asset, it's so much easier. This open transportation system, a level service D, this is a tough one to start with, but with the other ones, it's pretty straightforward. Your total value of your asset per person is going to be maintained because of taxes with that curve. And again, we can show you the back 15, 20 years ago, you were growing at 6 or 7%. So when someone's, I'll be honest with you, I think the development community was thinking, well, you're charging fees and you're spending taxes. You know, if you charge 100%, wasn't the level of service improved? Well, if you look up there at about 6 or 7%, when you're growing that fast, you're growing so darn fast that those taxes aren't having much of an effect when it's 20, when the developer's paying at 20%. But when you get down where we are now, which is the 2%, now we can start having that conversation. Rather than like, oh, wow, I'm going so darn fast, here's the fee, live with it. We can actually look at that curve and start making some decisions. Right. So this would be across-the-board cut to maintain a level service. Remember, this level service I've got allows your system to degrade to D. From the beginning, that's one reason I tell you to be careful with transportation. The system will get more congested. Now, the rest of them, when we show you this curve, you will maintain the same value per park and the same number of capability per person and everything else. But for transportation, because we can't afford to maintain your quality of service, we're starting with a conservative number. So that curve basically says, well, you've got a level service in there and allow it to degrade. You're going to degrade faster or slower than what your policy is kind of set in that equation. So there's a little difference because transportation is so darn expensive. And we did things back in the 60s and 70s that we're just never going to be able to do again.
Commissioner Slarty, were you agreeing with me, or you're saying that my statement was incorrect?
Oh, no, I wasn't saying,
Okay.
not in the least little bit, no. I was
Yeah.
just wanting to make sure I understood it more.
Yeah.
So another way of looking at it is, if each square inch of that graph might be $1 million, if you can measure the amount that's in that blue area. So as you move that purple line towards 3%, 4%, 5%, the total area to the left of the purple line, the blue portion is a bigger and bigger percent.
Yes.
And that's what, as I understand, he was saying if you get up to the 6 or 7%, the red area becomes a smaller and smaller percent. So it's a relationship.
Yes.
So the amount of impact fee dollars has got to increase as a percent for every percent of growth that you're going.
Right.
And so if you're really going in the fast growth up like the 6 or 7%, that blue area then is a much bigger percent of the total blue-red combination. So and that all has to be impact fee dollars.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question after Commissioner Solari is finished.
I'm done.
In the document that you put together here today, do you do any assumption of household sizes? I'd say our household size is not a statewide average. We're probably smaller, but did you use anything in particular? I'm trying to quantify a 1% growth rate against the population to how many units per year that actually kind of backs into it. Using 2.5, which I don't know what you use, but that's a number I've heard batted around in other studies. 1% would be 560 new single-family starts, and obviously 2% would be 1,120, which both of those are much greater than our current growth rate. And I don't know if I see Scott or somebody here that knows what our total count is in terms of single-family starts.
Yeah.
But I know I think it's under 400, under 300.
Yeah, it's been kind of averaging between 350 and about 420 the last, I'd say, 18 months.
Okay.
The ERUs.
So we're likely to be in the 1.5%. Well, right now we're probably at the 1% rate. We might want to strive to get to 2%, but right now the reality is we're at 1%.
There's probably three answers. The first answer is yes, we consider the size. I think your single family is 2.39.
Okay.
Your multifamily is 2.0, and what we call the ERUs, or equivalent units we can buy down.
Right.
Based on your population, we use that in our calculation. So
Okay.
the answer is yes to your first question. We clearly look at your population growth rate and the equivalent number of units that we're going to have to buy down in residential versus commercial based on the data we have.
Right. Okay. So then those numbers using 2.39 would actually provide 1% would be 600 and change or
so
something
that's
probably.
the first answer is yes, we used your local data. The second one is the range of your long-term projections are anywhere from 1.25% to 2% on the optimistic level. To be reasonable with what we're doing, to not overcook the books and buy down too much and make sure you're maintaining level service, we use 2%, which is a very optimistic growth rate. If you actually achieved, and we've looked at your data, back in the 60s and 70s, you were growing faster than the state, then you crashed down lower than the state, and now we're projecting you grow a little bit faster than the state. And so the 2% is an optimistic growth rate that if we use, and we do this buy down, we're not going to crash you into not being able to maintain your level of service for transportation.
Right. Okay.
And just, Steve, again, so I'm clear. As Commissioner Solari said, the area under the green line indicates impact fee revenue.
It implies the green line is the impact fee revenue and a tax at the different growth rates, maintaining a level of service. You adopt a fee discounted faster than that rate, you're going to degrade the level of service. So the area below the green line is an indication at that growth rate. If you adopt a fee below that percentage right there, it's 65%.
Can somebody give him the John Madden pen and let him?
Yeah. If you look at this,
It's right on top of the laptop or the.
If you look at this line right here,
It's up top, latched into the monitor.
Right.
what we're saying is that if
Right here. There you go.
The old JMP.
got a magical number, I can. Let me sit where you are.
Watch the graph now.
And I move around here.
I saw Chuck Mecklin getting lossy-eyed over there, so I'm going to help her.
Morning.
And this is good. We talked about spending some time on this one because this is really a whole new tool for, and you can use it in every one of your service areas in terms of the combination of revenues and taxes and level of service for any of them. Am I going to be able to touch the
You
screen?
should be able to touch it, and it should make a line.
If you see this,
Yes, and here.
it's not, you don't have to turn it on.
We haven't paid the impact for that yet.
No, I'm not going to do anything. Whoop.
Get that covered.
I can use this thing right here, I guess.
Try it.
Not going to work.
Try a different color.
You need to back me up.
I guess just use the
The cursor.
Yeah, I'll use a cursor.
It worked once.
I'll go through this, and I think it's very important. This is the annual growth rate, and I'd like to compare this to, as I said, you can almost put years in here. Back in the 60s and 70s, you were going at 6 or 7% growth rate. Okay, and this is a projected growth rate, or if you want historical. As your individual county's growth rate goes down, we move in this direction. So here we're using 2%.
Right.
Then what we're basically saying is this is the revenue you're getting for a unit of development.
And that is the revenue based on their consumption of gas, and it's paying the gas tax, any 1 cent optional sales tax.
Right. So if this was a single-family home, we're saying that a single-family home would be charged, say, $1.20, but because of their revenue, we're going to charge them $1. So about 20% of the fees being generated by that development. But the same single-family home that exists today generates the same revenue. You can't send the developer a gas tax bill or a sales tax bill and not send it to everybody when you're spending it on capital. Right. So this is what the law says. We can't charge them twice. Okay? And what this says is that if you discount the fee because of their revenues and you're growing at 6, 7, or 8%, and you charge 100% of the fee, you can maintain your level service. But because of the second tax from everybody else, if you start growing slower and you're getting that revenue from development and from everybody else, the slower you grow, you can absorb.
You can more pay for yourself as you go.
Exactly.
And you can cover more of that cost.
Look at the purple line there, the 2%, the average growth.
Yeah, so what we said is that for transportation, especially because we're very conservative and we're only charging for D, we're not charging existing service, and there's some optimism out that says you potentially over long term could grow at 2%. Let's take that as the growth rate you're going to experience on the average, and say, but again, I mentioned to you, you got some pretty good hefty money coming in. The state's spending some money, you got a little bit of sales tax money, you are spending some of your gas tax. It hasn't all been moved to maintenance, but usually it does over time. So in the current conditions, that if you grow at 2%, you can maintain that level service D, degrading down to D, and charge 65, 70% of the fee and still maintain level service. So this is a level service curve.
That makes sense.
And an absorption ability curve. The slower you grow,
right,
the more you can...
The less of a fee you have to charge in order to maintain your
If you drop down to 0.5% and you still throw your sales tax, you throw your gas tax, the state keeps building roads, and you only grow at 0.5%, you can maintain that level.
And you'd have to charge zero.
Right.
You could charge zero and still maintain that level of service.
Right.
Right. So then my question is, when you calculate that additional tax revenue, which is between the red line and the green line, is that utilizing all of the gas tax, all of our sales tax, or how did you break that down? And you just mentioned some of that gas tax has to go to maintenance and fixing potholes and repairing what we got. So what's the breakdown? How much
we do three
First of all,
things.
if we could identify the spot he's talking about.
Yeah, this area right here.
Is that right?
No,
That's
between the
what I
red and the
thought.
green.
Red and the green. But he's like me.
Well, he's calling red, I call mauve almost.
Well, let's talk about between just the red and the blue. That one.
You're clear on that.
Let's talk about that one first.
Well, that's the new development he's talking about.
Right.
Okay, I'm talking about between the solid red line and the solid green line.
That's the revenue come from existing people.
Okay, and my
in
question is-
relationship to growth.
So I've lived here since 84. I've been paying gas tax.
Right.
And you're saying you're going to take some of that revenue that I'm paying, and we're going to invest it in capital. I got that. How much of that gas tax are you committing?
Well, they've given us their numbers. We've looked at your gas tax, the state gas tax, and your sales tax for a few years. We look back 5 years. We look forward 5 years. We talk to you about what you're really going to be able to do, and then we come up with it and send the report with the specific revenues. If you could take and not have more and more of your gas tax going to maintenance, if you could take your sales tax and get it readopted, if you could make more commitment to the roads with taxes, we can change this curve. But
then let me just ask Jason or Stan.
Yes.
When you all gave them the number of our gas tax revenue, are we going to have enough to fix the potholes, do the petition pavings, keep our roads that we have in top-notch shape? Or are we going to be...
Well, we did.
Or every time we want to get a road fixed in one of our districts, Joe's going to say, I don't have any gas tax money left because we...
What we looked at is this. We had cut away back on resurfacing during the recession. So we looked at what we did before the recession, and we went back to that number. Also, we plugged in the roads that we think need to be resurfaced into an actual program that we think we're going to do. And I think is it $2.5 million a year is the number that we're setting aside to do resurfacing out of gas tax.
And that was pre-recession.
But to answer Peter's question, you can't answer that. You can just speculate, because it depends on the size of the impact fee that we end up adopting and the rate of growth which actually occurs. So, I mean, without actually knowing the unknowable, we can't decide it. But what this curve shows you is, well, based on their best guess for growth, which is the 2%, and if you go to the next one.
Yeah, I think maybe that's good. She just reminded me that was a presentation on the general concept. Here's your numbers. So maybe this will be helpful. Okay. Right now, based on the state and what you're having to do with your sales tax and talking with the staff, rather than buying down 20% of the cost, your projected gas tax buys down, you see the difference is about 10%. That's the reality of where you are.
Okay, so the previous one we run around was just like a generic model.
It's good that we talk, because you can see what happens to the curve when that 20 drops down to 10. The curve gets different shaped. You can't absorb the same growth rate. It becomes a little more conservative. So with your having to set your gas tax like you're having to do it in your current experience, you're basically, development's paying down about 10% of the future cost. And so our curve gets reshaped. And now you can see that at the 2%, you're only able to buy down 15% of the growth, because you just don't have that much tax going in. Which
means the impact fee has to be higher to maintain the same level of service.
Correct. If you readopted your sales tax and I could reshape that curve, boom, we could show you, wow, you pass your sales tax, make a major commitment to roads, find a magical way of taking your gas tax and not having to move it to maintenance, and I could do that first curve. But this is the reality curve here, what we were estimating.
So this is factoring the sales tax going away?
Yes.
Which is, what year would that happen?
2019.
So for the first 5 more years, it's on the books.
Right, and we brought that back to present value, but we didn't bring a repeat of it back to the credit.
So really, you can only really look at this in a 3-year or 5-year window, because if we go through this exercise every 3 years, we've got gas tax for 5 years, we're kind of projecting a drop-off of revenue that may or may not happen, and we're adjusting the fee schedule a little early in the time cycle of what's likely to happen. I could see where if you looked at, if this is the actual, if we're to do this exercise every 3 years, is that right, Stan?
According to the ordinance.
According to the ordinance. So if you look at it at January 1st of each year and you look what our growth rate was, then you know to continue the fees that you had, or you step them up to based on the growth rate of the prior year, and over the 3 years you may step up your rate to match your growth rate, but you don't have to match up to a growth rate that may not happen. I mean, we hope we have growth, but it may always be closer to 1% than 2%. And then you could do actual and just every year just reconcile your number and then adjust your fee accordingly.
I think you have to remember there's a few things. Your most accurate numbers are within your first 5 years. And if you look at this right now, our sales tax is going to exist for 5 more years. So, and I don't think you can assume that when that goes to referendum, number one, that we're going to get the full penny.
Right.
Most counties aren't. They have to share them with another agency. And you cannot make an assumption if it expires that if it's not voted in that you're going to have the revenue. I think that would be the most dangerous thing you could do.
You'd have to have an adjustment and increase of fees to make up the shortfall. That would be the reality of.
And you can do that because 5 years from now you're going to be revisiting this study anyway, and that's the time you would do it.
Well, in 3 years.
3 years.
3 to yeah.
And then, Steve, just so everybody here watching it is, we're all on the same page. The slide everybody's looking at now is the slide for the Indian River County specific impact fee and revenue. If you could just take the mouse cursor and go up the purple line and 2% growth rate. No, go up. Okay, come that right there. Okay, so what that says is at a 2% growth rate for Indian River County, to maintain our level of service D, about 90% of the cost would come from impact fees, and 10% can be made up of other revenue sources.
Correct.
Okay.
And
And we're
absorb
all,
that growth rate.
everybody's good on that?
On that, and then one addition, using the number in the 2.39 size household, our current growth rate, using the high number that Stan gave us of 420 units countywide, is 0.67%.
Right.
So we're way under 1% growth rate currently at our numbers.
Correct.
And
So we're getting close to that potential zero number. Not there, but you're getting closer to
Yeah,
it.
but hopefully we're going up.
Well, I know.
That's a good point. So right at the numbers of the high end that Stan gave us, which is right there, that says then that we can maintain our level of service with zero impact fees.
Well, you can allow to go to D with zero L,
Which is where we are.
with a very
Right.
slow growth rate. What we found, most communities, they don't want to go through, I've got this many permits, and 6 months later announcing the fee's going to go up, and 6 months later announcing the fee's going to go up. And so it's kind of a decision you have to make in terms of how to use, they call it the barometer in the
Although it's
process.
0.67, I'd say we're to the right of where the green
Just a little bit, yeah.
line hits to the bottom.
And I think it's important to point out that we're not at level of service D now. This fee is predicated on what would take to maintain level of service D. What we have is a minimum of level of service D.
Right.
Level of service D countywide would be basically every road in the county looks like State Road 60 and 58th Avenue. So that's, I think, what Steve's talking about is if we charge the impact fee at the amount, it would slowly, over many, many, many years, regress from where it is today to where you're at 58th Avenue, State Road 60 everywhere. So that's part of the rationale for the...
That's just the price you get to pay to go shopping at the mall.
Yeah.
You know, that
I
takes
guess
like a
no,
light
Mr.
change.
Is that intersection a D?
Well, I know.
I guess another way of saying it, we've done this for a couple of communities, but you got a really high quality service right now, is we could take this curve and take you what it would take to maintain your current level service, and we start out with, say, a $14,000 fee, and we run this curve, and we get you down to $6,000 or $7,000. And for transportation, that's kind of nonsensical. So I don't do that. I start with this conservative number.
Doesn't the existing resident benefit from, if we have a minimum standard of D, which we've accepted, if everybody that's here, that's already here, has been here for 50 years like me, wants to have the better level of service, shouldn't that be somewhat on the backs of the people who want to benefit from a better service versus a minimum service?
But you never really get there, according to that.
Yeah,
Yep, let me just put it in perspective. Ms. Tyndale, you used the most conservative approach we all agreed with was the level of service D. Where does this curve go on level of service C? I didn't want to scare Mr. Mora. So a whole lot more work involved.
It changes dramatically in terms of that starting point.
Will it have the same relationship?
Well, first of all, the cost goes up, and so the credit. You remember what happened with the 20 versus the 10 with this curve? So two things happen. The beginning point goes up,
Right.
and the amount of money you're spending, and percentage-wise, goes way down. So rather than development paying for 10% of it's going to pay for 5% on a very high fee, and the curve it doesn't do any of the other fees, but for transportation, we
It's
do
good.
this and say it's conservative, kind of stay with this fee, be careful, because this, I'm telling you, you can maintain your policy of allowing it to degrade at the same rate. That's what this right here says, your system is going to degrade at the same rate because you're going slow. It's not that you're going to maintain the quality of service you've got. And there's a big difference between transportation because of that. I just want to be sure you understand that fee allows the system to degrade. This is a level service with that statement to slow the degradation rate up, not to maintain what you've got on the street today.
And if I could just add, I think a local example of a street segment that's at D would be Indian River Boulevard in the city of Vero Beach area. As opposed to, I think that's correct. The intersection of State Road 60 and 58, I think, is below D.
Yeah.
The intersection itself, but in terms of a segment, Indian River Boulevard in the city of Vero Beach is there at D.
River Boulevard, so that would be between the bridge to Panera's.
Right, that's correct. So
But
that's a local example of
What's the
what
peak
level of
time on
service.
that when it's at that level? Is it just the 9 a.m., everybody going to the financial services job?
I think it's pretty
the yardstick that we use is the PM or afternoon peak, which
Okay.
is typically 4 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Which is the equivalent of a church on Sunday, as far as the maximum load.
I'm not suggesting it, but I just wanted to know that we would not recognize the curve if we went to level of service
Oh,
C.
no, it would be Yeah, I can do that for you, but it
No.
just kind of, it's almost like anguish to see that you just can't afford to maintain the quality you've achieved in the past, and this is a very conservative number, and you're really deciding it to maintain the policy of the degradation rate, not your current performance. That's the reason we're usually more conservative with the transportation one, because it is a degradation curve because of the equation, not a current performance. All the other fees, when I talk to you, you'll be able to maintain the current value per person. This fee, the value per home that you've got right now in this county is about $20,000, not $1,000 or $2,000. It's huge because of just the historical value of land, the 40-cent gas tax we talked about you did in the 60s and the 70s. You just, public's not going to do that again. And I think everybody's willing to accept more congestion, but you just need to be careful with this curve. It's a curve to allow it to degrade, and you can either pass a fee or do the same analysis. I want to be very careful I explain that to you.
Well, in terms of crediting or trips, we have probably the most successful GO-Line bus system where we moved, 1.2 million passenger segments last year, which is taking individual trips off the road, putting them on public transit. People that participate, or if they're on a route line and they can add a new stop at their project or something that is part of that, is there a credit formula that looks at that? Since if you take 1.2 million travelers segments out of the roadway network for a small county, that's some percentage of trips you're taking off the road.
2 days worth, maybe. Maybe 2 days worth of trips.
Yeah, exactly. We're a country that doesn't use other modes. We use cars. Even in the most successful public transit system for small counties, which we probably are, that doesn't add up to anywhere even close to 1% of all trips.
Okay.
So it would be almost unmeasurable.
Okay.
The one place I have seen that done, it's more urban areas, is they will take their transit routes that are very productive in mixed-use development, and that's all they'll buy down. If you'll build on a transit route that's got a high frequency and it's a mixed-use development that's walkable, that's the ones they discount. So they do use it to discount, but he's right. I mean, Miami's probably got a 3% mode split or 4%. The reason the models don't work is when you get huge systems that have the highest rate, they're taking 3 or 4% of the traffic off the road.
Okay, gentlemen,
keep going.
We're good on this slide. Thank you for your patience,
Sure.
Steve.
No, I think that was really important. I think you're seeing, and we found it takes sometimes 2 or 3 times. This is you're going to see the same curves for your other service areas. They're going to be dramatically different looking than this one is.
And Steve, while you guys are segueing over, I had a question back when you're calculating the right-of-way cost to plug in all this. Does that include land needed for stormwater retention ponds?
Our right-of-way is the total cost that they're paying for designing a roadway, whether retention with swells or retention whatever. It's the total cost to develop the roadway.
Everything associated with it.
Well, in the backup, it just said the width to build a lane or, the new road. And I know that, I think in the past we've had that argument whether a stormwater retention pond created capacity or not, and I was just curious.
Whenever you create an impervious surface, that creates a need for the stormwater.
Yeah, we have one county. We have one county that's out trying to put a whole stormwater system together, especially for state roads, buy credits, pull the drainage out efficiently, and then when they go to build a roadway, they don't get in a big fight about the two. So, I mean, there's a lot of creativity going on, but that cost is in here.
Actually, the numbers that we provided included any easements, drainage easements, access easements. And when we do our right-of-way purchases and acquisitions, we typically include all of those items in with the actual right-of-way purchase. So easements, drainage, and everything should be in there.
I was just curious because in the backup, the table said our cost for right-of-way per mile was $738,000, and we paid that for a house. So I don't know how
we didn't get the house.
Oh, we didn't get the house.
Right.
We got some.
Yeah, sometimes it's much higher than that, depending on the mile.
Right. It's a back living in it.
I thought I was through. Oh, okay. I had a couple more. The residential fees, if you adopt the residential fees at 100% of the number, we basically can take that curve, and rather than buying everybody down at that rate, we can buy down the non-residential and we can reduce that by 55%. So that's applying it by specific use rather than across the board. And that's what most of well, I say most, we've had 2 or 3 now that's implemented this, and they've been targeted with the reductions. And I guess this is what it looks like in terms of the rate comparisons. One is the calculated, in which is what we think you can charge, and the other one is the affordable growth strategy, where you're using that curve not across the board, but specifically for the non-residential uses. And you can see now that the non-residential uses then from the current fee are reduced substantially because you're giving them the credit for that tax investment.
And is that based on the 2%?
Yes, that's 2%, and it's equivalent. It's almost ERUs like drainage. We take all your projected growth in non-residential, and rather than having them buy down that major residential growth, the non-residential growth is usually very much a smaller percentage of the total impact, and so we're able to buy down that non-residential growth at a much higher rate if we don't use any of it to buy down the residential.
Do you know on this chart where it has Brevard Manufacturing that they don't charge anything there, how are they addressing that, providing that exemption or non-collecting?
Brevard, as a matter of fact, today's got a pre-proposal meeting to update their fees. I can just tell you that 20 years ago I was working with a firm, and the question came up. Brevard's done some things like discount or do away with fees for non-residential while and put them back in, so I'm not sure. But at one time we presented to them that if you pick a specific use and you calculate the percentage of what it's going to do in permitting, and you show us de minimis, it has no potential of impacting your quality of the service. They call it de minimis, and you got 2 options. You take a little bit of money and you buy it down to be very careful, or if it's so de minimis, you just don't even worry about it. And so it's not uncommon for counties to have a very specialized use. Usually it's a certain wage rate and a certain percentage, and they just zero out the fee. They take a few bucks of their gas tax or sales tax and show that it's allocated to it, kind of like what we're doing. And I've had a few that just, because it was so de minimis, they just discounted. I don't know, but that's
well, I like
potential.
That. I'm sure that's helpful to attracting manufacturing jobs to Brevard. Is that not being
and so
a cost
if I had to guess, it may be that they just showed that it's such a small percentage of the total growth, and it's got some guidelines, right, and they call it de minimis, and they just exempted them. But I'm guessing.
Right.
But I mean, there's all kind of ways they can accomplish what they've done.
Okay, so the toughest part of the presentation is over, so we breeze from now on. We have 7 other program areas, as you know, and for each one, our approach is pretty similar. We call it a consumption base. So we look at the value of the asset, what the community invested up to that point, and that's covered under the inventory. Like we look at all the capital assets and what they cost today. We look at your level of service, both in terms of achieved and also the adopted standard. And achieved level of service is obviously reflective of what's been invested and what the new development can be charged at. But the adopted standard shows the future commitment to provide either the same level or less or more. So we use lower of the 2 numbers to have a conservative fee to make sure that we are not overcharging the new development. Cost component, again, is the value of the total asset divided by per person or per unit. And the credit, again, is giving future contributions from new development, any kind of revenues that we're going to get from new development, a discount, so that we are, again, not double charging. And then the demand component is measured typically, in some cases, what we call functional population. That's just the density of people at a unit. And then for the fee program areas that doesn't have non-residential components like libraries, parks, it's just the number of people per housing unit. So I'll go through briefly of the other ones. We start with correctional facilities. The county expanded the jail since the last study. That was like one of the bigger projects. As far as the future projects right now, there's nothing major anticipated in the CIP or a master plan. The inventory that increased with the new jail, so that increased the value of the whole system. That increased the cost per person in the case of correctional facilities. Credit decreased compared to the last study, and increased, and the effect of that is reversed. So when the credit increases, impact fee decreases, and vice versa. And in the case of single-family, demand stayed pretty stable. So overall, the fee increased about 70%, and the main reason for that is because of the investment made, large investment made. And one thing about correctional facilities, they are very lumpy investments, large-scale investments. You build one and then you don't build one for a while. So, you have the level of service increasing and then slowly decreasing back to what you want it to be. So in terms of the rate comparison, the current to calculated, the fee is increasing just at the 100% for all categories. When we look at the affordable growth, we have a very large credit here, but that's based on the historical expenditure. So that's one thing to be careful. That was related to the Phase 4 expansion. I think the last part of it was completed in 2008. So if the county over a long term continues to provide, on average, that type of investment, then you really, what this curve is showing, you really don't need a fee. It is large enough investment that it's accommodating any growth. If, on the other hand, that revenue disappears, then you may need the fee and something in between. So again, this chart shows the current compared to the calculated and affordable growth. So under affordable growth, we show no fees. And then we have a couple comparisons. So the current fee is about $174 for a single family. That would go to $290. The two counties we have ranging anywhere from $70 to $500 and so on.
Can I ask a question on the one chart prior? So that we could actually do an annual report that shows, what I like to do is take the emotion out of decisions of when you should collect or not collect, and you'd actually have almost like a dashboard of impact fee capacity and different uses that, as you know, one is reaching the line where you need to start collecting again. It's kind of known and projected in advance so that people know it's not a surprise, it's not a change, it's basically when capacity gets used up to a point where you can start seeing, depending on what the state does with judicial sentencing guidelines, a year or longer, they go to state. There's a lot of different things that are going to change the capacity of jails over the next couple of years, but to where you could sort of track that and say when bed capacity, occupied bed capacity equals X, you need to start collecting this fee again, and it's a formula that's just out there that people know when it hits that fee goes back in with a 90-day notice, and that fee goes back on the books again. Mm-hmm. Or it goes off the books when the bed capacity changes, or same thing with school seats, when you have enough excess capacity here for a school that you actually can completely tear a school down and take a 700 student capacity out, and they still have the capacity to absorb them plus other available capacity. At some point, you don't need to be charging a school a school fee either, but we'll go to that when you get to schools.
We think that it might be appropriate to look at that each time we do the study, like every 3 years or so. Part of the rationale here is we have excess capacity there. We built that big jail expansion back in 2007, 2008. Part of the reason the affordable growth model results in zero here is because we use sales tax. We did a $21 million expansion there, sales tax. So all that sales tax gets loaded in, and we're able to buy that down if we want to, which works for us right now because we don't have a need to expand the jails. Right. But as that comes in, if the sheriff comes to us and says, hey, I need to build, I'm full, I need to build, it'll get put into the 5-year CIP, right. And then we would need to build that in. And I think if we review the impact fee every 3 years, that's probably frequent enough to make those adjustments as we need.
Are we paying ourselves back from taking correction facilities impact fee dollars and putting them in an account and paying ourselves back from the sales tax that we put in that?
No, but I think that's a great idea. I think we should.
I don't think there's any money left.
Yeah, we haven't done that. Yeah.
There you go. You just Joe created another bank account.
And I say no big, there are some smaller projects that the sheriff's office has in mind for the next few years, but we don't have a big jail expansion. There are some equipment things.
I guess I'm asking, A, are we, or B, can we? I want to know if legally that's allowed to be done.
We're not doing it currently.
Yeah, I think you'd have a hard time. We did the same, and one thing we did in the recession, we did the same with roads. We used to only pay 27% of our optional sales tax went for roads. We're up to 71%. So we're utilizing so in the last couple of years, because there was no impact fees coming in for roads.
Are we simply just exposed to the same time constraints with all the other impacts?
I think I can help a little bit because we got some counties that are being pretty creative about loaning services money. But you need to, I personally believe you need to do it up front. And what they'll do is they'll either put a bond out or a sales tax, and they'll loan that service money, and they call it a loan, and then they show projected revenues that will pay that bond off, or rather than using cash, and then they take that payback and they spend the money that they would have had to pay on something else and say, I can pass a fee, pay off this loan to them, and spend it on here. What do you want to do with the fee? So you could use the fee to pay back the loan and then transfer that money somewhere else, but you need to do that up front. So if you go to build another correctional facility, you may want to think about the concept of having a loan or bond or whatever and then using fees to pay it back. But right now, I think you'd be at risk of
trying to retroactively
saying that was a loan when you really didn't adopt it that way, and then taking these fees to because what you're going to do is take a correctional facility fee and spend it on something else when you call it a loan. I mean, that's what you're doing. Right. So you need to do that up front. Is my,
I think when you see the need for additional capacity, you have to look at ways, if you front build it with tax money, but because there was a demand, you could actually have the fee to pay that
back
debt
that
service
loan over time. And we've done that with schools, with bond programs, where here's a school we built that is finally going to be consumed over some period of time. You can either use a millage to pay the loan off or use fees. So you're really paying for growth up front and then letting growth absorb it and paying yourself back. But you really need, there's something you can talk about, that you need to do that formally kind of up front with any one of these.
Right.
Yeah.
For the initial.
And also, if you do a bond issue, you got additional costs called interest expense.
Right.
So it adds cost to it.
Right.
And the second thing is the rating agencies do not like impact fees, as you have to have two backup. They do not. It's too volatile, so they want a backup pledge, so you eat up another pledge of your revenues.
Yeah, I'm not advocating bonds, but if you did have one and you do it up front, and the other one is even if you use cash, you need to call a loan up front.
Right. Like we would interfund borrow. For example, if we were building the golf course and just replacing the
irrigation system.
The irrigation system, we interfund borrowed, then you could pay for that out of recreation impact fees through the interfund borrowed and pay that account back from interest.
Yeah. But I'd be very careful now trying to move forward. But in the future, you might want to look at, if you use your sales taxability thing, you might want to consider a loan to that service, to where if you collect fees, you can take that and put it in maintenance or something else and not get caught saying you're charging a fee and not spending it on capital.
And we couldn't use impact fees for the irrigation because it's a replacement.
It's not expanding capacity. I get it.
Okay, solid waste. There are a couple convenience centers that were built since the last study, and there's plans to upgrade some of the other existing centers. We had a couple of methodology differences in this study. In the last study, there was a portion of the landfill included, but it looks like between the assessment and the tipping fees, that's taking care of itself. And at the previous study, county was doing the waste collection. Now that's being outsourced, so that takes away the truck inventory, the garbage trucks. So the inventory that relates more directly to growth is the customer convenience center. So we focused on those in the study, and they are only used by residential land users. So then that's why the fee now is only being charged to residential land users. So the calculated fee in this case, it's for a single-family home, is going from about $78 to $145, and then all the non-residential are becoming zero because of that. And convenient. Go ahead.
Question. You back up on page 25 when you get to the summary of the capital for the facilities. you value all the facilities at the same, at the facility value, all this at $2.6 million.
Right.
Which I understood was basically the cost of the transfer stations we redid.
That's the most recent convenience care center cost.
But, so you're saying that here, if I read this right, that the Fellsmere Convenience Center, which is on 4.75 acres, that had about $2.6 million of improvements, is worth no more than the Roseland Convenience Center, which hasn't been redone.
They're both in District 1, that's why.
We just...
I can't... That's like saying the value of a renovated house is the same as the house that wasn't renovated.
We are valuing the assets at the value of what it would cost to build that today.
And that's why we use go back to the prior slide where it shows, that's where we have, the prior one to that, that's where we have the upgrade expansion. We're looking at upgrading 2 others. And that's 2 or 3 others, and that we're saying is going to cost about the same as it did on the last ones we did. That's why.
Okay, so you're not saying the facility value, you're saying the facility replacement cost?
Yes.
Okay.
Improvements.
Yeah, I'd also question whether you can actually put that much value on 1.38 acres, which is up in Roseland, but that's a different question.
Oh, no, he didn't.
Customer care services are being partially, or actually a good portion of it is being funded with the solid waste district funds, and so that's again giving a large credit. And as long as that contribution continues, solid waste is another one that you do not need the fee for new growth. It's enough investment there to maintain the current level of service. So in this case also, just like the correction facility, the affordable growth fees are at 0 for all land uses. And then public buildings, the county built several facilities since the last study, the administrative building and emergency operations center, and then there are some plans to build new courtroom facilities in the CIP. The one methodology difference in the public buildings is on the demand side. Last study we used 11-hour functional population, which was based on how many hours these buildings are in operation. But since then, we got really legal advice that 24 hours is a better approach. It makes it more consistent with the other fees, and it redistributes the balance a little better. So we switched to that. So then that affects the demand side of this fee that you'll see. So in this case, again, the inventory increased significantly. This is one of the cases that the achieved level of service is higher than level of service standard. But because the standard represents what the county at this point committed to continue providing, we use the standard, so we use the lower number. And that sort of moderates some of the increase due to the asset value. So then the cost per person increased about 16%, while the inventory increased quite a bit, just partially because of that. Credit decreased, the available funding decreased. A lot of the facilities were built in beyond past 5 years. We are looking at, when we calculate the credit, we look at past 5 years and next 5 years. And during that period, the funding availability decreased for public buildings. And then for single family, demand increased significantly because of that 11-hour versus 24-hour shift. So the fee for a single family home went up significantly, but for non-residentials, it went down again. So this one shows again the current against the calculated. So the full calculated fee is about $750 for a single family home. That's a big increase, and then all the non-residentials are mostly decreasing. When we do the affordable growth, because the credit is so much smaller this time, this is one of the cases where you need most of the fee to maintain the adopted level of service standard, because that's what we use in the study. So for all fee areas, it's like you need about probably 90%. And if we adopt the residential fees at 100%, then the non-residential can be adopted at about 50%. So we can move the reduction to our non-residential. In terms of libraries, some bracket library was built since then, and there are really no major projects that are being planned right now in the CIP or master plans. And this is another case that inventory increased. Actual level of service standard is also level of service itself achieved increase, but the adopted standards remained the same as the last study, so there was no change. So we used the standard again, which is lower. So overall, the cost increased somewhat, but the credit decreased significantly because there's not as much funding available, which increases the fee. So the fee increase was, in this case, mostly was driven by the reduction in credits. So the fee went from about almost $500 to $700 for a single-family home. And when we do the affordable growth approach, again, because there's so little outside funding, non-impact fee funding available for this area, that we need most of the fee if we want to maintain the adopted level of service standards. So we kind of can reduce that $700 fee to $680 again if we wanted to maintain these standards.
Just a question on our CIP plan. Do we have any new libraries in the next 5 years?
We do not have any major library expansions proposed in the next 5 years.
Okay.
One thing you might see how libraries are changing is technology-based. Everything's going to, like Kindle books and things like that. So it's going to be more of an automation transformation.
Emergency services, fire, EMS. Since the last study, Fire Station 12 was built in a training center, and in the CIP there are 2 new fire stations programmed, as well as some vehicles and equipment. In this case, inventory increased some, and then cost and credit changed a little bit. There was not as much change, and the fee overall, based on everything, increased about 12%. So fee went for single family from $285 to almost $320. Now,
can you go back one step for a minute?
Yeah.
In doing some research on 911 response call requests by jurisdiction and by the ESN numbers, how they break the county up into different pieces, you can clearly see, if you look at the 60 corridor where you have the assisted living facilities and ALF and whatever names they put to those, you see a much higher call demand for that type of land use compared to a family-oriented multifamily response to things in that area. And not picking on one type of housing use, but there's clearly a much higher demand for services for different multifamily land. I think we put, let's say, Indian River Estates. They have, I don't know, probably 1,000 plus units, and they're there probably a couple of times a day picking up somebody because the population's so great. But you could have 1,000 units somewhere else, and they don't go there but once a week or some, when it's not for a 55 plus or a targeted market group. Do you guys make any adjustments or should we look at a different land use type to address appropriate fees for types of a different type of use of a multifamily?
There's about three answers. Number one is if you're doing a fire assessment, which is demand-based and operational cost.
Right.
We've started dealing with size and benefit. If it's an assessment's benefit, it can be quite a variation by use. This is a capital fee, which is an availability fee. And so the capital investment to build a station, and what we find is that if a fire station is more than 30% utilized, the data shows they're overburdened. They're actually experiencing fatigue. Mm-hmm. Most of the fire stations are between 5 and 7% of the day active. And so this is an availability fee, not an operational fee. And so what we do is take the functional population, not the actual call, and say, unless that, and again, remember, the utilization is very low. So if you built 3 or 4 of those uses, would you have to add another fire station? The answer is absolutely not. There's no real relationship between the capital investment and these hot spots.
Right.
So we're charging for the availability, not for the operational costs, and it's quite a bit of difference between a fee and what we're doing here. So we take the functional population and say, and what we're finding is that a fire station can handle about 30 or 35,000 people. On the average, you're probably averaging 10,000 per station. but you're not pushing that 30%. So this is an impact fee. It's based on the functional people there, not the actual physical calls, because it's not operational in its cost. So the fee is a little different than a maintenance or an assessment fee in terms of use. It's a capital fee. So we're taking, because you have a piece of property and now there's more people per square foot there, you pay a little more fee, but the actual operating costs and the frequency, because that station is not anywhere near fully utilized and the cost doesn't go up. A little bit of gas maybe, your gas bill may go up because of use. So the answer is no, we don't differentiate by demand side. We do it by functional population, and the benefit or the proportionality of having to build a station and having the truck sitting there, the EMS sitting there, and the vehicle ready for a call.
And also differentiating between responses, it's about 80% EMS demand and 20% fire demand.
And 20% of the fire, only about 5%, that is actually a physical fire.
Right.
Most of the time there are other types of things. So it's got to be very careful between an assessment, a tax, and a capital fee for building a station. And so far throughout the state, we've apportioned the impact fees based on the availability. It would be like trying to measure how many people go specifically to a park and having a little bit of a higher fee for some uses that the people visit the park more often. One, we don't have that data, but this is an availability fee, and it's a capital investment fee.
Right, because on that, I don't know what the station number is, but at 26th Street and 66th Avenue, you'll have two stations servicing probably, 7,500 people, but because of the EMS demand is so high, they really need another station there that's way below that 30,000 per station number that you had.
That's where you'd get in more of an assessment or a fee for use and or the benefit versus the capital investment.
Okay.
The impact is held only purely on availability, and if as far as the usage, there is a fee attached when that white vehicle does approach your home.
They do a billing.
And that's how we
recoup
compensate for the amount of operational costs.
Mm-hmm.
But if we did that, that would be a double tap.
Right. Because then they're paying for the service, even though they paid an impact fee when they pick up the phone and call 911, they're going to get a bill for that, but
they're only paying for the availability of the service, the existence of the service, and not actually use of the service.
Right.
And the insurance company addresses that later.
Do we bill for fire response too if there's an actual fire, but we bill for medical, but we don't bill for fire?
No, and historically throughout all jurisdictions there, ambulance conveyance is addressed at beyond the availability, is addressed with the participant of the usage of the ambulance.
And the $500 is well worth it.
But yeah, you said it was well worth it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can discuss that.
If you call it early enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
You called early, my dad called late.
Yeah.
In terms of affordable growth for fire EMS, there is a large credit because of the emergency district taxes. So that right now they are being used to build the station, so that generates a large credit. And as long as that commitment continues, then very little of the emergency services fee will be needed for new growth.
That's a good point, though, because if we anticipated the opening of the two new stations, that surplus is gone as soon as those stations are open. So if we go to a zero fee now, we know that we're going to have to change it later, or else increase the millage rate.
Right. Right.
Yeah, but this one is really there. Because the cost, the operating cost to open a new station is so great. Right. I mean, it looks like there's plenty of money left over there, the way that graph looks.
Right.
But the day after the station's opened, it gets sucked away.
Right.
Yeah, the cost of building a station is equal to 1 year of operating on it. So
absolutely. Yeah. So if we were to have that kind of funding continuing on, then you only need maybe 10-11% of the residential fee, and then you can buy down 100% non-residential fee in this case.
If you go back to fire one time, I know in St. Lucie County to the south, when some user built a very large facility, they had an impact fee, but then they had something that went over and above for them to buy a particular million-plus piece of equipment that they needed to protect that facility. I don't know the mechanism of how they were able to, I guess maybe it was a DRI. Does that kick in and you can have, it was a combination of the Sam's and the new Walmart right at the Martin County, St. Lucie County line, and they, the way the story is read is they got picked up the tab for a new super something truck of 1.5 million or something they ended up having to come up for or something. I don't know how that happened, but we don't have that. Okay.
It's going to be beyond the impact, though.
Yeah.
It seemed odd.
More or less a managerial question, though, not an impact question.
I think
we just have to go into details.
Right.
I know in downtown areas you have very expensive ladders and things. I mean, there may have been a very unique hazardous material type thing, something unique to the development order, but I'm not familiar with it.
In terms of law enforcement, there was a crime scene building built, and some land purchase was completed over the past few years. And there's a master plan that looks into additional facility needs, but there's nothing right now programmed or funded, or nothing major. In terms of the impact fee variables, the inventory with the construction of those buildings increased. Level of service looks like slightly decreased because number of officers are the same, but there was an increase in population, and it's measured in terms of officers per population. And then the cost per resident went up because of the additional assets again. And credit, during this 10-year period, there was no non-impact fee funding used for any capacity expansion. So any expansions were done with impact fees, and they were smaller scale. So then we didn't have any credit in this fee. Demand stayed about the same. So between the increased asset and the reduction in credit, the fee for single family went up about 75%. And again, this chart kind of shows for all of them. So it's for residential, it's going from $250 to about $435 per home. So because we don't have any non-impact fee funding, any other funding available, this is not one of the ones that are eligible for affordable growth. There's nothing to buy down the new growth. So then affordable growth fee would be the same as the calculated fee. And then it would be a policy decision to discount it across the board, maybe. Parks and recreation, several facilities were built, ballparks, multipurpose fields, and there are several more programmed in the CIP to add facilities to parkland. In terms of inventory, in terms of the land inventory, it's remained relatively stable. We had a more conservative approach this time, took out any kind of submerged land, and we were very careful about including only the county-owned parks and only the usable parklands. So inventory stayed about the same because of that. Level of service decreased some, again, because of the population increase, but these are all measured in terms of acres, and that's one thing to be careful because all the facilities built on them increase the value of the acre. But the level of service is just looking at the acreage. So cost got moderated, the cost decrease got moderated because of the additional facilities, and credit decreased significantly available funding, which increases the fee, and demand decreased somewhat. So the fee increased about 30% because of both the facility increases and also the reduction in credit. So that made the fee of is right now about $1,500. That brought it up to about $1,900. So 30% increase. That's the single family, and this is one area that is charged only to residential land uses, not. And in terms of affordable growth, because again the credit is shrinking and the available funding is shrinking, the county would need most of it, about 96% of it, to maintain the current level of service. So the calculated fee of $1,900 would go down to about $1,800 if we were to maintain the level of service. So with that, this is just summarizing all program areas again. So in terms of calculated fees, the residential fees are going up about 15 to 20%, and non-residential is varying depending on the land use and demand. when we add the affordable growth option, residential land uses are, the increase is getting moderated somewhat, so it's 5 to 10%, so relatively stable, and non-residential land uses are pretty much all decreasing. As far as the next step, of course, today we are here to get your input and now finalize the report, and then we'll have additional public meetings and move to public hearing.
Thank you. Gentlemen, it's been about an hour and 40 minutes. Would we like to take a quick 10-minute break before we segue to the next phase?
There you go.
I take that as consensus. So I have 10 after. We'll come back at 20 after.
erase, start back. Probably another clear thing, yeah.
Steve, you guys ready? You all ready? Stand now. Commissioner Flesher, Commissioner Zork. Yeah, if they just don't pay attention, like I do. Waiting on you.
How are you doing?
I've got a quorum, that's all I need.
Let's stop voting.
Oh. See, that got him.
Well, we don't want to.
We'll go ahead and call this back to order. So at this point, we're looking for input from the Board of County Commissioners. Commissioner Fleischer, would you like to start off, or any comments? Or?
I have a lot of comments that I would like to hold for the summary towards the end there. This was a very in-depth presentation. We truly appreciate that. A little less than 200 pages to digest in just a few days as well. You've made it a little bit more palatable to do that, specifically with the graphs, although I know Commissioner Solari preferred those things with the numbers you like so much.
I'm good with the graphs. They're fun, too.
Yeah, the graphs were good, though. But with that, no, I would like to hear from the public. I'm very anxious to hear from the public input, and then I would like to save some time towards the end.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Davis, any comments? Or
No.
Commissioner Zorn?
I do. I'm probably going to do a little both, a little now and a little at the end, but kind of to date the history on myself, going back to 1984, 1985, when myself, Peter Robinson, and a handful of others heard a presentation from then a much younger Larry Arnn, who was the president of the Claremont Institute, coming to the Treasure Coast to talk about impact fees of something new that was coming from the West Coast to the East Coast. And that was my early interjection. I think the original traffic fee was $157 roughly. And we said, gee, that's not so bad. Why is that bad? And Larry's saying, no, that's where it will start, and it will creep, and there'll be revenue shifting, and things that you used to pay for with one revenue source, we'll go pay for something else, and then we'll use the impact fees to fill the gap. So I do have a pretty decent history, and I don't like them. They're partially a necessary component that you have to look at to fund the things that the county has. I've been at some meetings where representatives from different groups have said, I've never heard a CEO from a company say, I didn't move there because you have an impact fee. And I want to just summarize when Hertz Corporation picked Florida, and then they looked at Lee County and Collier County, and the quote from Hertz was, reduced impact fees were among the reasons Hertz Corporation agreed to move to Lee County in comparing Lee and Collier County, that there was a corporate decision of which county to go to, clearly looking at the cost of impact fees of where they were going to build their new facility. So they may not come out and tell you that's the reason, but in this particular case, Hertz did make a public statement that I found not a conservative group. NPR is not a traditionally known conservative publication or news group, so I take them that they are accurate at what they've been reporting. In looking at whatever we decide to do, establishing the value of a fee, and then I like the formula approach of when capacity decreases to X or available services decreases to X, a fee is either suspended for a period of time or collected if you need to pay for the next replacement of capacity. So having some things put in place that waiting for 3 years or 5 years to look at something, I'd rather have a January 1st mini snapshot or a dashboard look of, okay, here's where we're at with all the fees, here's our capacity that we need. We don't need to collect these for the next 6 months or 12 months. We'll look at it again then and decide, does that fee go back in or out again? And I think on the school side, is the school district, have they not provided back the data that you guys need to know what their capacity is or what's missing from the school to be able to discuss that a little bit further?
Right. They've provided some information to the consultant, but they haven't had time, and we haven't had time to sit with them and the consultant to go over and make sure we got the right information, it's up to date, and make sure that, what assumptions to put in, because there's also some revenue side assumptions. So we will be getting together with them probably in the next week or two to work on that.
And I think also they've got to go back to their board. Staff has to go back to their board before they'd bring it here. So there's a lot more steps for them, and that's why we and their staff has to get information. They have to approve by their board or make the changes their board wants and then come back.
Well, I think if we told them that if we'll suspend them until they get all their information together to us, that might encourage them to move along a little bit quicker if they see that.
Actually, I would like to say, in all fairness, we're the ones that kind of slowed it down and discouraged it, because it wasn't them, it was us, because it would slowed our whole process down. In all fairness, we're the one that kind of encouraged them not to do it because it's going to slow us down.
And I know then factoring in when they actually removed and tore down a school, that capacity, how does that play into the big picture that there seems to be there's still some pretty adequate capacity in our typical unit size when you factor in some of the areas that in this study we looked at Inner Shores and Sebastian, other areas that were definitely below and sometimes way below the 2.5 sort of normal average you hear out there. I think it was 1.87 on one chart, 1.93. So we're really closer to the 2 or a little bit less when you're looking at projecting, because we have a lot of empty nester types that don't have kids or kids that are in the school system. So it may be a time where you establish what their fee would be, but it doesn't need to be collected until their student capacity goes up to some number, and then they have a need to add a additional school. There are some other items that I submitted to Stan last week that are a little bit more procedural, that I think this is more of a number crunching concept, and I have some things of addressing ways that a applicant that, and I don't mean to use Linus Cadillac as an example, but when they wanted to remodel their showroom, and Cadillac said we're going to update everybody, they had the covered area where they had cars parked on display for 20 plus years, and they said, well, if you're going to put glass around the cars this way instead of the way it currently is, you have to pay for that new capacity of enclosed space, but they would still have the same number of cars on display, and they chose, we're not going to pay the fee. That the avenue for them to explore appealing the fee was too cumbersome and costly to decide to argue the fee, so they just designed around the fee of not having to pay it. It would have looked nicer the other way, and I don't think a fee would have been due if they had the chance to go to some entity or body or some policy that said, if you dispute a fee or don't like the way your application is being evaluated, that you can go to some entity, or I don't want to say committee because I know that would be a no from Bob, but that they need to go somewhere that they don't have to hire a consultant and a traffic person and another person and pay a fee to find out an answer if they can have another option, or should they really be paying any fee at all. So that's more of a procedural thing that I think that we could look at with the county. Talked about existing capacity. And do you see other areas that have kind of this dashboard capacity idea where you should turn a fee on when you're here, and if you have excess capacity, that fee is identified, but it's not collected until there's a shift in capacity or demand?
I guess the closest we can come to, and they call it a barometer, is that it was City of Orlando. They discounted the fee, I think, 60%, and said basically, and they wanted to be careful, and they didn't want to have a barometer that every 3 months you're notifying everybody the fee might change. So they discounted it, I think, 60% because of a reasonably projected growth rate. Not the exact number they had now, and said that within 2 to 3 years, anytime during that time, if the growth rate surged, we could adjust it. But they did not want to have a dashboard that everybody was fearful of.
Okay.
So they adopted,
that would be acceptable.
They adopted not 100%, but 60%, and said now we can go all the way up to about 1.25%, still be conservative, got a good reduction, and then in 3 years, we'll check it and use the barometer, maybe have to go to 70 or 80% because we're growing a little faster. So they call it a barometer, but they were very careful not to make it to where the development community was fearful of every 6 months seeing a...
Right, okay. And that's actually a better idea than I was just trying to come up with a conceptual thing, but that would be something that you look at your growth rate to decide what's the back end, where's that curve line to decide what amount of a fee you should be charging, or the discount factor.
And I think there can be problems with frequent changes to the fee schedule for everybody involved in implementing it. So we're trying to do things that work within the 3-year framework, so that.
And I think really this, if we were on the 3-year schedule, when should we have actually done this exercise?
Well, the code, the code says that the board is to review the fee schedule every 3rd year. I think you guys review it much more frequently than that, in terms of suspending and looking at the fee. I mean, you guys know this stuff inside and out real well. But I don't think, I'm not just being snide. I mean, I think it's conceivable in a 3rd year the board could review the fee schedule and determine we don't need an update. You know, things haven't changed that much. Yeah. So I think you all have more than every 3rd year reviewed the fee schedule. We've done all these temporary suspensions, and I think in this case, in last year you decided to do an update and do the very exercise we're going through now. So we will at least review it every 3 years, I'm sure. But in terms of an overall update, yeah, it should be about every 3 or 4 years.
And then also, when the word de minimis was used, say in Brevard County, this would be using a small restaurant that because of the type of food they serve and the way their menu set up, they fall into the fast food category, which is tens of thousands of dollars per thousand square feet. And I've got one restaurateur that he has discussion from the health department says and another department says you really need to be more ADA compliant. His solution is better to build 2 new ADA bathrooms basically on the backside of his facility, but he triggers then a $40,000 impact fee to add 2 bathrooms, which is not changing his total his capacity, but the chart says you're adding, so we have to charge. And again, that's the idea of having this entity. You could say, well, that's not going to add a demand. He doesn't need to. He's exempt, or it's de minimis, or something.
That wouldn't trigger. A restaurant in our county is based on seats, additional seats, so it wouldn't trigger.
It is square foot.
Oh, is it square foot? I thought it was food.
But the amount, in this example, I think the amount would be small. It wouldn't be triggering 1,000 square feet or something like that. So I think, the fee does relate to the enclosed square foot.
Right.
There was, at the Dunkin' Donuts out of 90th Avenue and State Road 60, because they had an outdoor storage for a freezer or walk-in refrigerator combination, it was an extra $10,000.
Right.
$10,000.
And those things,
And that's our highest fee.
Yeah.
One of our highest fees that fast food with a drive-through.
And the reason why I didn't say anything is because philosophically, I have a problem with somebody waking up in the morning in Sebastian and saying, okay, because that Dunkin' Donuts is there now, I'm going to skip all the other ones that are on my way down there, and I'm going to 90th Avenue, State Road 60 from Roseland Road and US 1 to get a coffee.
Right.
Doesn't work that way.
Right.
There's a drive-by. They don't generate trips. They don't
generate new trips.
No. Now I'm going to hush. I'm sorry.
And we could go into percent new trips and the formula, and that is factored in. It's a very high.
And then also looking at the Publix at 53rd Street and US 1, it's taking trips off every road segment, and I shouldn't say every, because now they're able to go to that location. And some people have said we probably should have paid them for putting that facility there because it's taking so many other trips and background trips off the road to the services. They're going to have banking, food, fast food, all the different things, but they're actually shortening trips because of where they're putting the project at. And I know we don't look at it that they're going to pay full boat on everything, but in reality is they're shortening trips and taking trips off links that are at very high capacity, like US 1 from 26th Street to 41st Street. That segment has some pretty high trip count that's now going to be lower because of what they did.
But, sometimes proximity increases trips, too. I know when we first moved here, the closest big box hardware store was either Jensen Beach or Melbourne.
Right.
So we might make that trip once a month.
Right.
Now that I have one in my backyard, if I'm doing an indoor plumbing project, I guarantee it's 4 trips in a Saturday. So
I want to change your plumber.
Yeah, well, no, it's you turn that wrench too hard on a pipe, and then it's a call to the plumber almost. But I understand your point, because I thought the same way too. But when I thought about my behavior, once a month we would make the drive.
I used to do that.
If you like, I can spend 1 minute talking about that, because it's been talked about since my first study in 1985. The first thing is that every capture trip that comes on and off the road is a zero fee. And a car slowing down, pulling into a site has some significant impact. And for retail reasons and what you're talking about, we charge 0 for capture trips. And they are significant. You have a commercial highway that's got a lot of retail, and you'll find really has an impact on the amount of cars. That's number one. Number two, and it was Severo that's done it, and I've been looking at it for 20 years. He didn't look at just a marginal building of a building. He called it metadata. He looked at just, I think it was like 700 different communities, and he looked at the ratio of that retail and office and the amount of trips. And it's kind of like what he was saying, that the frequency increases dramatically because of convenience and the discount. And what he concluded was that the reduction in trips is related to employment, not retail or office. And he's got the statistical kind of proof. And what you do, if you do marginal, like 100,000 population county that adds something versus 150,000 population, you try to do a marginal analysis versus looking at you're at 100,000, you're at 200,000, you're at 300,000 population. What is the difference in your traffic volume because of retail? And he basically concluded that having the employee, and I've watched it, the McDonald's employees live near McDonald's. It's interesting, the numbers that live there. And his conclusion was, between office and retail and all of them, this whole debate about it's no new trips, you're right if you just look at employment only and not if it's a McDonald's or whether it's an office complex. And he's got a pretty statistical solid basis for concluding you're right. If you put employment in an area, it reduces the gross trips on a regional basis. But if you think it's because of the shopping, there's no relationship between the trip volumes and the VMT going down, because it's just the frequency. People will plan their trips when they don't have retail available, and people won't plan their trips when it is available. And his conclusion was there is no doubt in his mind that employment along a highway can reduce trips a percentage, but it doesn't matter whether it's an office or retail. And what we've done is we've measured that in our calculations in terms of total trips. Between my experience over 30 years and his study, which is about 4 years old now, I'm convinced that marginal feeling is there. But if you look at the total development cycle that communities go through, there is some benefit from the employment, but it's being recognized in our measurements. And there's some minor reductions when employment appears at different locations in the county. And that's the general process now. And I think there's been an over-feeling of that the retail is somehow reducing the trips. And again, I'll remind you that if you've got 60% capture, we charge 0 for those 60%. And I'm telling you, they have a significant impact on the traffic ability to move capacity. And there's no charge. So we try to be as fair as we can. 100% capture, we've managed your diversion. We don't charge for it. And we try to reduce that retail just absolutely as much as we can. But I honestly feel like that the discussion about the overall trips being down is related to the employees that work there.
I like it when you have to wait at 58th and 60 and sometimes, if you're lucky, 3 light changes. I think of the sales tax revenue that's coming in, because that means they're out shopping and spending. That means our 1 cent tax is pinging, collected on the budget side.
I do think that you can't, when you drive past like the McDonald's on US 1, those that just expanded to 2 lanes and it's all the way out to US 1 and stopping traffic, I think they generate a lot of trips at that point. I think.
And on the Publix example, when they built that new Publix at 53rd Street, some people's trips to Publix got shorter, yes, right. And that's captured in the calculation with the capture and the percent new trips. But I would say that there used to be 7 Publixes in this county. Now there are 8. Publix sure is planning on having more people shop at those 8 grocery stores than we're shopping at the 7. If not, they're doing really bad business decisions. And people go into the grocery store, and it's not, a lot of times we think about the customer, we think about me. You've also got the cashiers and the stockers, and the fact that Pepsi and Coke and Frito-Lay and Pepperidge Farm all send their own stockers, so they send somebody to stock the bread at one Publix, 2 Publix. So there's all those additional trips. It's not just the customers. There's also the employees, the suppliers, people going to maintain the building and all that stuff. And Publix ain't going to open an 8th Publix unless they think they're going to serve more customers than they were at 7 Publixes. Because if not, they're going to go out of business soon.
And that's all I have, but I'll have more at the end after I hear some of the public comment.
Okay, Commissioner Slory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First thing is, I think that we see the wisdom of reducing the commercial impact fees, our initial direction, so I think that's a big plus. Early on, you said that the law says you must use the most recent data, but on the A3 section, table A2, residents per housing unit, you use the 2000 census data. And the reason I'm wondering why you didn't use 210 is because I think, particularly towards single-family homes, it probably would have showed fewer, in our community, fewer residents per home. And so I found that curious.
2010 census does not give the data by land use. It gives it in aggregate. So it gives you for all housing units and all population, not by single family, multifamily. They quit tracking that. So what we did is we looked at 2000 aggregate and 2010 aggregate, and I made an adjustment based on that difference to each land use from 2000.
Yeah, I saw that land use, but I'd asked Bob. It has a high usage or higher usage for the 25 square foot or greater home, and it's at 0.265 per residence per household. For the Barrier Island, I'd asked Bob Keating specifically before he left how many residents he thinks is in a home, and he came up with about 2, which more or less fits my neighborhood. So, because of the 265 is used, the impact fee for a single-family home is significantly more than an impact fee for a mixed use or a mobile home. And for me, there's a value to having single-family homes in the community. I think it does a lot of good things for a community. So I hate to see a higher than what I would consider justifiable number used to come up with that. If it's possible to use what is more common in this community, I think that would be a benefit.
Because we're more unique.
Well, we do. And I think here in that same table, it talks about using the adjusted for peak seasonal population. But in a lot of the other things in the numbers, it's functional population. And it would seem to me, especially in my neighborhood, that the functional population of a house in the neighborhood is probably 1, where the peak seasonal population may be that 2.5 or 2.6 or 2.7. So that makes a huge difference. And so I think the long and short of it is I'd rather see you use the functional population data for the single-family home rather than the peak season data.
We use the functional population for for several of the areas. We use weighted population, which is seasonal but adjusted to full-time, for libraries, parks, to the ones that are only charged to residential land uses. The other thing is, I think there used to be a retirement home category, if it's the deed-restricted retiree homes, that we can adjust if there is a lot of that development that can be added as a land use.
We have that, don't we? 55 and up don't pay school impact fees.
That's correct. If an entire community
like
had
Woodbridge
that,
or by the mall,
right?
That north of the mall there, that's a 55-plus community.
That's correct, and that's in the ordinance. It's just exempt, essentially. It's exempted from that particular fee category.
And
correct.
Vista, whatever, if it were to come in today. Yeah.
My bottom line suggestion is if you can get with Stan and just see if that number, which appears to me to be high, is right. I certainly wouldn't want it to be overstated in any way, because for me, at the end of the day, I really don't want to see the impact fee on a single-family home rise any.
And it does vary within the county, and this is a county-wide average. But we have some areas where it's over 4, and some where it's much less.
Mine might be skewed the wrong way because of where I live. I agree.
Understood. Yeah.
One other question on that. There's also a second data set that we used in looking at enterprise zone eligible areas that's a 2010 data that also has a lot of breakdowns, and if Bill Shute was here, he could tell me what that report is called, but you're able to break it down, I think, by land use, and it's something that not Enterprise Florida uses, but it's through the state that actually took the 2010 data and then crunched it in a variety of different formats for eligibility for other activities, and if he was here, he could tell us what it's called, but I'm drawing a blank on the name.
Right. We'll check to see if that has any effect.
If it would provide something more current.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Bob.
I'm fine, thanks.
One other question, in looking at the traffic counts, and Chris could probably answer this, if we looked at the trip count on State Road 60 between 66 and 90th in 2007, and we looked at it today, what's the decrease, or is there a decrease in the trips on that segment after the capacity was added? Or has it stayed, are the trips the same, or are they less?
No, it's actually gone up. For several years after the economic turndown, we were experiencing slight decreases on all 400-plus segments that we measured in the county, including State Road 60. Now that has started to creep back up. So we could look at it. We could get you a year-by-year breakdown since 2005, and it's started to come down and then back up.
Okay. Are we back at our old levels, or are we just getting closer to them?
Well, since the additional capacity has been added,
that's
six-laning out, the volume to capacity has actually gone down because of the additional capacity that's been added.
Right.
But the total traffic volumes have started to creep back up now.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Capacity would have went up significantly when it was
6
completed.
lanes, yeah.
Right. All right. Thank you.
And just to make sure I'm clear, basically the whole affordable growth model says that at certain growth rates, particularly at the lower end of the scale, that the level of service can be maintained with a less than 100% level of impact fee, and then adding in supplemental income either from gas tax or sales tax, and then that relationship changes based on where the growth rate curve moves. Is that correct? Okay. The only big concern I have with that is just it seems to me we would be relying heavily on two revenue sources, the gas tax and sales tax, that I see in a long-term decline. With the gas tax, I think the overall price of gas is still creeping upwards, which tends to have a downturn in consumption. We see more and more hybrids. We see more and more electric cars coming on the system. We see fleets like Waste Management in Sebastian is now going to be converting their whole fleet to natural gas, and so there's going to be a whole lump sum of tax that we're going to lose just because of that. So, I see the gas tax revenue decreasing over time. Sales tax, I think, is even in worse shape. We see if you've been watching the news and all the retailer reports from the Christmas season, most of them are pretty dismal. Best Buy same-store sales were down almost 1%, and shoppers are conditioned now that they're not going to buy unless there's a massive markdown. We've gone from Black Friday to Black Thursday to Black Wednesday now, and still they had poor holiday shopping, and so shoppers are conditioned. They're not paying that full retail price, and that's going to affect the sales tax. Amazon is getting bigger and bigger. We're seeing more online shopping and that revenue. And then just, the Tallahassee, the state legislature, the governor is now talking. He wants to expand the sales tax holiday. It's an election year, so those are things out of our control. But, a couple, 3, 4 more days, no sales tax will have an impact. We've seen the legislature try to grab our revenue share for things like Department of Juvenile Justice and our Medicaid numbers on our revenue sharing. They're grabbing more and more of that. So I've got a concern that if we go down this path, is what was presented. I just have a concern that we're relying too much on revenue sources that I see very suspect. And then my other concern is, and I asked this earlier, and staff said, yeah, we'll have enough of the gas tax set aside for road maintenance and pothole repairs and stuff. But what about some of the other things we use sales tax for, upgrading the Dodgetown facility and the multi-generational building, and I think we just added in $500,000 for additional sidewalks for pedestrian safety. We tap that sales tax for a lot of these things that come up relatively unexpected. So are we going to be leaving that bucket too empty to be able to handle some of the things that come before us in the normal course of the...
We had all those concerns, every one of them, so we looked at it. Jason looked at it very carefully. We left 10%, is it 10% for projects that come up? Because we went back historically, what has the board have to add, had to add in optional sales taxes as things occur, events mid-year, you say, okay, we need to get a sidewalk here, we need to take care of this. So I think it's 10% we took for those projects, 10 or 5. We also looked, we have a real concern about the sales tax and the gas tax. That's why the consultant showed that declining, and we had those concerns, but we think we could correct, if we see this, we'll do this adjustment, we'll come back to the board if we feel we can't make the plan and make you aware of it right away. Also, this is a 3-year horizon, and we can make the corrections, but that's what we thought, and we were also conservative. We had all these concerns, because when we first went through this, it didn't look right initially, and I said, why doesn't it look right? And Jason and I started looking. It's because the last 4 years, all we've done is cut everything. So our road maintenance, we cut it away back. The 5-year road maintenance became a 10-year resurfacing program. So we went back prior to the recession and said, we got to plug that number in and maybe a little more to catch up on the resurfacing. So we've done all that and adjusted, and Jason can speak more to it. But we went over this very carefully because we have all those concerns. And our thoughts for this is, let's say we see ourselves going down the road, we're going to come back where we're not making our plan, because we look at it every year, we're going to say, look, we may have to adjust sooner than we think in the 3 years. But we have all those concerns, and we'll have a major concern in 2019 when the optional sales tax goes away. I mean, it's going to change us if it doesn't get voted in, and that'll be a major concern. So we've looked at all those things and tried to adjust as much as possible for it. But we have, and that's why I say if you do adopt this, we're going to monitor, and we don't think, and I think every year the capital plan, when it comes to you, every year when you address it, if we don't, we're going to let you know right away that we can't make it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Slow, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I just, to address your problem or issue a little bit, these all numbers, while he was talking about in specific, 8 different specific impact fees, it comes out to an aggregate number. And at the end of the day, the aggregate number says that X amount is of this amount, say $100 million is going to come from impact fees and X amount from other sources. So we can ask Jason to do a spreadsheet. I mean, he likes them as much as I do. And just
No,
to,
I don't think so.
just to
He just tells you that, Commissioner, because he's being nice when you play it.
that may be it, but we can ask him to do a one-page spreadsheet which has that aggregate number and what this actually recommends, and then do a little sensitivity we'd ask him to do that from now to about 2023, so we can see the impact of no longer having the sales tax and what that would mean to us, but also to have at least 2 scenarios, what this one is and what it is if there's an extra little gap for you. So, for instance, if it was 50% today, and it was $100 million total, well, we know it's 50-50. What would it be if we used 45% from other sources and 55% for the impact fees? And that might give us a different real view and might tell us which direction we want to go in and give you a little more comfort.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. Any final things before we turn this open to the public? Okay. So anyone from the public, we'll go ahead and open the floor up. Would anyone like to please come up and comment?
Quick.
Looks like there's a few.
Okay, well, I guess we'll close that now.
Chuck Meckling. So I saved you from Joe and Charlie, so I'll go first.
Thanks, Chuck.
I appreciate having the meeting. I appreciate several of the commissioners' comments. Commissioner Solari, appreciate the fact that we want to use actual and factual numbers. I actually really enjoyed Commissioner Zork's comment about many years ago, the start of the concept of impact fees in that first meeting and what it opens in the door. And I relate to the frustration of what Commissioner Davis said in regards to the whole concept of drive-bys and pass-bys and the concept of commercial. One of the questions is the concept for the future meetings as far as additional workshops will be handled in what sort of fashion. So last time we looked at impact fees, it was, whatever the term, a committee, a task force, or whatever, but we were able to get in a room and sit with the consultant and actually try and totally understand this whole concept, which I think is a critical piece of this, because I do understand by being on the MPO committee that there's needs out there for the roads and that there is diminishing revenue in these regards. I know the concept of the additional 6 cents gas tax that could be levied by the county would be an unpopular concept, but when we look at the charts over time, the reality to St. Lucie County with what they charge at the pump is equal to what we charge at the pump, but that county takes the extra 6 cents. So when you look at that, you got to have some realism, because that, I think, is what we're taking here, a deep breath of what's a realistic future to have a level of service in Indian River County. When we do a development, one of the things that happens is we look at where it sits, and then we have to do road improvements on county roads. Then we have to come back and the builder has to pay impact fees, so we're paying 2 times to have some of this level of service. And then when we take a look at trip generation counts, we look at the ITE standards, and sometimes what they say to what we're trying to do, and then the county won't support what the ITE standards say. So there's a lot of issues sometimes that come into play that add numbers on top of numbers on top of numbers, and at the end, the cost of doing business is so unrealistic that those people we want to have come here, and I appreciate the vision that we have this slow growth up here, because that's the term everybody likes to hear. I understand our concern is when we don't grow with grace, when we don't retain what we love here about our county, that everybody gets concerned, and I get concerned. But what I'd like to do is to make sure that we don't put an undue burden upon the impact fees, because those people that come here help to create Indian River County. They help to let us grow in a responsible fashion, and those people are the consumers that have the discretionary money, hopefully, to come and spend at the stores, at the commercial buildings, at the restaurants, and all those places that have taken their time to operate in this county as a business, and they'd like to keep their doors open. So I'd like to make sure that we have the welcome mat to have those people come to our county as well. And that's why I was trying to also understand, the format for the next workshops. Will they be in this sort of arena, or will they be in a different format?
Yeah, I think we have some options for that. I think a lot of what's going on today obviously is educational. People finding out about the approach and what some of the potential results could be. There's a number of options. You all could have another public workshop that could be in this format, or it could be in the other room in Building B, and kind of roll up your sleeves and look at a couple of potential issues. We could also have a meeting of representatives from different groups and have a call-in and a kind of a webinar with the consultant to get certain groups more up to speed in between now and the next workshop. So I think we have a couple of ways that we could handle things.
I think the draft technical report we got is back up here. Is that available online?
It's on the website. It's been on the website. Yes.
In fact, you have to go to click on under County Commissioners, and when you click on that on the ircgov.com, then you can see the entire 228-page document.
We're going to put that front and center. I'll have the webmaster, Jason, have him put it front and center on our big picture, and because it's become such an issue. One of the things we discussed, and I think that if we need to give people time to look at it, because this is an extensive report. We deal with it every day. People do not. So I wouldn't rush the workshop. I'd say give a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, for people to look at it. That's all the commission's decision. That's just what I'm thinking.
Give a little longer, because I think that, say, the Treasure Coast Builders Association needs to have a time and have a meeting to look at it. I'd hope that the chamber might be able to get with some of their people and have a meeting and look at it. And so to accommodate the different groups and such, I think we need to give them, I'd like to hear from them, but that would seem to me to give them 4 or 5 weeks at least.
And I think Stan and Jason could go around to those groups initially and talk to them and go over things and make notes, so when we do have the workshop, the consultant is ready. So I think we're going to also try and have, like with the realtors, the Treasure Coast Builders Association, and groups like that, or any major interested party, and try and go over it.
And if Stan hasn't seen a lot of the community lately, so it might be something that he'd actually go to different municipalities, or at least Fellsmere and Sebastian.
Yeah, and Phil too. I forgot. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Because I think it's important that they're aware of it.
Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint from today also?
Yeah, I think we'll have that posted as well. I think we'll have all the materials posted on the county website, including the PowerPoints.
So, Chuck, I think what I've heard is that probably we'll have a handful, at least, of very informal working sessions with staff and anybody who's interested, and can go over the backup, the appendices, and everything with the data in it. And then if there's additional specific questions, those can be directed to the consultant, and then when he comes back, we'll be more efficient. But certainly, I think the board does want as much public input and conversation as possible, so we'll work towards that end.
No, I appreciate that very much. I just, want to make it. I know we don't have to think back very far to the dark days of what took place in America, I think that we've had a whole industry, and it's called the building industry, it's called the local builder, and it's called a lot of local subcontractors are not in existence anymore. And that is a cause of what took place. It was a foundation of business and community that had roots here in this county, and that is non-existent. Many people had to move, many people went out of business. I'd like to make sure that we don't do something to hurt that industry, as maybe we're starting to see a small turnaround. Earlier this month, Florida Trend had an interesting article about the new guidelines for mortgage lending, et cetera, that has taken place, and how many community banks are getting out of that business because they can no longer meet up with the federal rules of doing business. And every time we take a piece of business out of the picture, it's somebody that may not have an employment in this county, and I just want to make sure we don't go down that path. Thank you.
Along the lines, Mr. Chairman, of the next workshop, after if this board agrees, I would prefer we have our final one, unless it gets contentious and we need such a big room, to facilitate the back and forth conversation. I believe where we have our MPO meetings, are a little bit more conducive to back and forth and discussion. This feels more like a county commission meeting where it's just a little more too formal than it needs to be for us to have a workshop setting at the final one.
And if enough of the builders and developers and others actually wanted it, I wouldn't mind to have one where they were the main participants, where I just got to listen. And Building B would be a great place for that, but that would have to be more driven by that community. But if 5 or 6 of them say they'd want something like that, I think that'd be a plus, because I'd rather spend 2 or 3 hours listening to them talk about it than us talk about it.
Me too.
And I would just say, Stan and Jason and Joe, I think it's the wishes of the board that we have as many informal meetings with the public as we can on this, and just make it happen.
Okay. That means you probably need maybe three workshops. This is first, 2 more. And we'll also have maybe our staff reaching out and dealing with them to get the information for the people. And then we're going to have, if we do the ordinance, there's a first reading and then the second reading, and those will both be public meetings, and they'll be in here. So the next 2 workshops we'll probably try and do, as you have suggested, at Building B. Now we're going to televise them. It's a little harder at Building B because they see it only the back of us, but that's okay.
No,
well, then if they want to know what's going on, they need to come and be part of it.
Okay.
When you say that, we would have a workshop where we would have the representatives from the various organizations as a primary at first blush. Because Chuck brought up a very interesting statement. I recall a previous impact fee session where we had about 150 people here. I'm looking around the room, there's not 150 people here in the room right now. And many of those entities are no longer here in the county. And that's the sad state of affairs. But by the same token, there are largely impacted members that are here today, and I believe that there are more numbers that we would be seeing, especially if we invite the representatives from the Realtors Association and the Builders Association, and we get their specific input. The type of input that we used to have several years back is specifically in the older building, where there was standing room only, and I believe the capacity in that room was about 150.
I think, as suggested, we can cover it with kind of these smaller group meetings and meeting with representatives and doing the multiple workshops. And if we need more, you can make that decision. You can make that decision as we go forward.
Did we raise the impact on the fee?
Also, what kind of time frame I just want to question between the workshops, what kind of time frame would you like to see as commissioners? Do you want the first one in 3 weeks or a month or 2 weeks?
Well, a lot of it's going to depend on going to these groups, and it's going to be on their meeting schedule and seeing if they have an open spot for you.
So what we'll do is I'll have them start to meet with them, and we'll come back with an agenda item for the board of when we'll do it. How's that?
I like that. But I think at least a month and a half.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have monthly meetings, and again, we've had just a few days to look at this 150 to 200 pages. They're going to need some time for their presentation before they get to us.
Mr. Paladin, welcome.
Joseph Paladin, President of Black Swan Consulting.
I'm also president of Atlantic Coast. I'm a builder and a developer here, and I have been for several years. As a builder, I've spoke in favor of impact fees several times at several impact fee meetings and county commission meetings. I think, we had a term we used for years, new development should pay for itself. I think we've come close to accomplishing that feat. I think impact fees is probably the only way that you can say new development pays for itself. We have to take responsibility for our own doings. As a builder, building homes, would I like not to pay impact fees? Certainly. Absolutely. Why not? But as a citizen of Indian River County and as a businessman in Indian River County, do I think that's fair? Absolutely not. As a developer, it's a similar situation, but not quite. As a developer, if I want to develop a piece of property and we're not having impact fees pay for infrastructure, when I go to develop a piece of property and I don't have infrastructure, how do I get it there? How do I make that happen? I can tell you the only way you make that happen is I'd be responsible for all of it. In a lot of cases, that would make it almost impossible for me to do a development in that area if we didn't already have infrastructure in place or go into that area. So it's two different scenarios. But I think impact fees is a major part of development paying for itself. As far as new growth paying for itself, I'm not sure whether we could ever make that happen. But new development definitely does pay for itself through impact fees, and I would be in favor of continuing impact fees, but reducing commercial, industrial, retail impact fees based on formulas we bring forward where we could legally defend it in court. Now, my input would be, as negotiating as a businessman, impact fees. Residential, let's take that first. If you get out and pull 5 building permits, I got to write a check for around $90,000 just to submit my building permits, just to apply. I think that I would change that somewhat and make it more of a business decision so the county didn't give up its money for impact fees and the people here didn't have to take over that difference and help support new development. But when I applied for a building permit, when I submitted my building permit, my application, I wouldn't pay anything. When I picked it up, I'd pay 50%. Now in Brevard County and some other counties where I worked in the past, we'd pay the other 50% at CO. That's a little bit of a problem maybe because you don't want to be holding a new guy that's going to move into a new house or he can't move into his home if the builder don't pay his other half the impact fee. So I would say a compromise. Pay half when you pick your building permit up, pay the other half maybe on your second inspection or your third inspection or halfway through. That would, now you're using draw money. You're using money that you're making as you're going forward instead of it all coming out of your pocket up front. So I would suggest something like that would be very helpful to the builders here in Indian River County, and still you wouldn't be giving up any money as a county or as a citizen. As far as commercial impact fees, I think that once you reduce them through the new formulas, that would be a big help. And the other part would be finance your commercial or retail impact fees over a period of 5 years. And then the guy's paying the money back over a period of 5-year period when he's making money, instead of it all being up front when it comes out of his front pocket. I think that's business friendly. I think business-wise that makes sense, and that's the only two things I would add to your discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. While we're over here, we'd like to acknowledge we have Joel Tyson, Fellsmere City Council member here, and also Jason Unemaker, the Fellsmere City Manager. Did y'all have any comments from the City of Fellsmere's point of view?
Good afternoon. I appreciate this is the earliest I've come to a county commission meeting where I've spoken to y'all. I think this is exciting. It's the first time, and as I get older, I get less excited about reading 200 or 300 page technical reports. This was a good one. I think for the first time I've read an impact fee study that's actually a dynamic policy tool for y'all. This was good stuff. It gave me a good education of kind of the resources we have, the planning that's gone into it. But also there's a little bit of foreboding about some of the revenue streams. I think the point that was brought up about gas taxes was a legitimate one. Something I'd encourage y'all to revisit if y'all ever mind to. I know that's been kind of contentious in the past, but this really highlighted the need to take a look at that. From the city's perspective, this thing is exactly on point, wanting to move non-residential forward. I can think of any number of developments that have not happened, hotel, other developments that have occurred in a diminished capacity because of the impact fees. Even something as, it's not very sexy, but take the raceway that became a racetrack, or was it vice versa as far as the naming? They specifically didn't develop to their potential because of the impact fees. So something like this.
And just so everybody knows, that's a gas station, not an actual Daytona 500.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Those make a difference. Tax base, it doesn't require a great deal of service. I would be very leery of doing anything to help subsidize single-family developments. It's not that we don't want them, we do, but they are very costly. We've seen that. In a couple of the areas where the impact fee study points out, where it's in sheriff services, EMS in particular, that's where those service calls are generated. And we've seen, speaking of bubbles, it seems very clear that we may be on the trajectory of another one. These things don't seem to abate. We run in 10-year cycles. So it's just something I think we should be cautious about. But from the city's perspective, I think this is going to be a very good tool for us. We'd encourage y'all to look at it aggressively as far as the non-residential goes. And I think it also gives you the opportunity of let's do this, let's look 5 years down the road where we are, and then maybe revisit the residential. But I'm pretty sure we still have somewhat of a backlog in that regard. I don't know how much inventory we've burned through, but there still seems to be a pretty good availability. I know things have picked up, but it does seem like there's still some resources out there. So we're excited about it. I think it's a great product, and we're excited about where it's going.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Then Mr. Wilson will come to you.
I take much too long.
And I promise not to. Richard Bialowski, Reef Road in the county. Chuck mentioned the pain that we've all felt in the industry. It's certainly a reality. Part of the way out of that, I think, is for small developers, is to look at unfulfilled niches and things that the large developers won't touch. And one of those trends nationwide is toward very small homes. It's certainly been a successful product in some locations, and we're looking at that right now. I've had a conversation with Stan about this particular point. I'm kind of hoping that the whole concept of case by case is maybe back in the realm of possibility now that certain things have changed here. And I'm looking at the distinction between single family and multifamily. It's the question I asked Stan. We're working on a project with very small single family detached homes. When I say very small, I'm talking about 800 square feet to 1,000 square feet. The model we're working from, there's a wonderful book called Pocket Neighborhoods by an architect called Ross Chapin. And Ross has designed some homes in the Seattle area that are as small as 515 square feet or 375 square feet. They're like pieces of furniture. They're beautiful. They've been really successful marketing them. But you look at something that size, it's a single-family home in terms of fees. I'm trying to understand what the difference is between, and I'll wait till I get the consultant's attention here because it's probably a question for him. My question is, there's obviously a major distinction in fees between single-family and multifamily. I'm curious how that's derived, and I'm wondering if it wouldn't be possible to have some sliding scale where if you have an 800 square foot, a 900 single family home, the percentage impact of the single family fee on that home is a significant burden in a place where you're trying to be particularly cost sensitive. If there couldn't be some scale that small home was considered closer to multifamily, I just do not understand how a 1,000 square foot multifamily attached product would generate any more impact than the same size if it was detached from the other homes. We're still talking 8 dwelling units per acre. Nothing's changed other than the design. So it's a detailed question, but since we're talking workshops and we're talking about evolving this, it's a question I'd like to put on the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And, Mr. Chairman, we can have the consultant look at, there's some differentiation in residential product type and see if there's any basis from trip generation or other characteristics that would warrant that.
And you'd have to factor in going outside to change your mind and coming back in, those extra trips.
And that's true. And also on that size category, as we have, again, not to penalize or benefit one group from the other, but I think that comment is right, and I've been following up on some of the ideas of a project that they're working on. But if you're at 8 units to the acre, whether you're multifamily attached or single-family detached, and you're still at 8 units to the acre, the option of going with the lower fee schedule would make sense, because if you're looking at really how many units per acre, so the garbage truck he picks up for 8 people per acre, whether it's multifamily or single-family detached at acre, so your trip count shouldn't be any higher than the multifamily rate. They're just choosing to do them as small footprints on a piece of property versus connecting them all together. Also, we have, we go 2,500 square feet or greater. Is there any backup data that shows when you have a house, let's say that's 5,000 square feet or 7,500 or greater, and they have the nanny, the housekeeper, these other things, that are they really generating more trips, or is size of the house not really contribute to additional trips?
We look at national data and the people per housing unit by size, and it tends to, when we have the greater than 20, the natural breaks is what you have right now, where it seems to,
right,
the curve seems to curve. But then we also recommend capping at 4,000. Beyond 4,000, you don't see a lot more people. It's not continuously going up.
Really? Okay. Because
So-
I know some of the new places that were built on Ocean Drive that are probably 12,000 square feet, and there's a pretty good chunk of people that come to service and work and take care of, and there may be one person that lives there, but there's 6 that take care of stuff. And again, I'm not trying to penalize the guy that's done well and builds a 12,000 square foot house, but there seems to be background trips, or I don't know what you want to call them,
Service
but
trips in there.
they have people do a lot of things for them, which is good, personal assistance and other things that come to help them. So I would think a 4,000 square feet or a 20,000, that there probably is more some kind of trips, but if it's not quantifiable, then you can't really build another category for them. But the smaller ones, 0 to 500 is something, or some brackets that I don't want to say incentivizes, but charges the appropriate amount, similar to multifamily, seem like it would make sense.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Wilson?
I was going to say, are you closing the agenda?
No,
we're adjourned. Yeah.
Break.
Hi, my name is Charlie Wilson, P.O. Box 651114, Vero Beach, Florida. I just have a few questions I'd like to ask of the consultant. I know this is a long process. We'll have more chance to I don't want to get too far in the weeds. I have been studying this for 6 or 7 months. I've been before this commission many times. I have a vested interest in it, as you know, on a lot of levels. I'm here with 3 hats today. First of all, I'm on the board of Imagine Schools, which is a charter school in South Indian River County. I'm disturbed that the information from the school board is not here. I have been in contact with the school board for the last 6 months. They at first were very cooperative, and then in the last 4 months they have absolutely clammed up. They will not give information, nor will they put anything on the agenda. So I can understand why, because I believe that when you see the information that I have, and I'm going to show you, is their position is exactly indefensible. So the more we put this off, and the longer we delay, the better off it is, because the more money they get to collect. So I understand that process. One of the things we need to do before we get...
Can I just say something about the school board? I don't want them to get blamed. It was my decision with my staff to remove them to not slow up the process. So I don't want to blame that elected board because we made that decision. I think we'll take responsibility for it. I will.
Well, they have had ample opportunity to discuss this issue. They know what it is. They've had it in writing, and they have not put it on the board for 6 months. So whether they have not brought the information to you, they still have had the requests and the ability to discuss the information, and they simply haven't done so. And I can tell you why. If we want me to start there with hat number 1, the reason why is because over the next several years, their projection is they're going to lose 500 students a year. So how can they increase capacity with impact fees over the next several years when they're losing student stations? They have less student stations today than they did when they started, and yet they've spent several $1 million. How can you spend several $1 million and end up with less capacity than you started? There's also the school's capacity. The school's projections are based upon population figures, and I believe that this comes from Tyndall Oliver. All program areas being considered for impact fees in Indian River County require the use of population data in calculating existing levels of service, performance standard, and in calculating future demand for capital facilities. When you look at the population estimates, and I don't want to get, that's for a across the desk workshop, but where Indian River County may, I believe the number is they suggest that the 2020 population is somewhere around 190,000. I have it here somewhere. I can pull it out. I don't want to get stuck with the numbers. But the school boards is 227,000. The school board's estimates are 40,000 people more than the inaccurate estimates that we use. So I don't blame them for not trying to defend their fees, and I'll get those exact numbers for you. I'm sorry, I just don't want to waste your time while I'm running through, because there's 250 pages here. There's 250 pages here. There's 250 pages of backup to the alternative study that I did. That's 750 pages. How many pages are the Bible, Tim?
Depends whose version, King James or...
Well, the point is that there's probably more pages of impact fee studies going around right now in Indian River County than there are pages in the Bible. So it's going to take everybody a little time. So I appreciate the workshops that we're going to have in the future. And speaking on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, I will be happy to review that when the Chamber of Commerce when the staff goes to brief the Vero Beach Chamber of Commerce. I'll be very happy to have that event. Speaking of the workshops and the traveling show, one of the things I want to mention is I will stipulate that, and I have no quarrel with the staff. I'm not picking on the staff. They're fine people. They're getting along fine.
You're in trouble now. He said something nice about you. The punch is coming.
But really, yeah, we always like you, but they do have a point of view, and I stipulate from here on out throughout all these discussions that the staff wants to keep the money. We all know the staff wants to keep the money, and I understand that. Doesn't make them bad. It just means that's their task in life, is to collect as much money as they can and spend it in the wise way that they try to do so. So when they go to brief the realtors, or they go to brief the builders, I would just want to suggest that the briefing they get may be slightly tainted. And I'm confused most of the time, as you probably well know. But in the executive summary, as an example, it says, in addition, the direction received from the Board of County Commission is to maintain the residential land use at current levels and develop a methodology to reduce non-residential impact fees. Now, I was here, and I heard the second half of that, to develop a methodology to reduce non-residential impact fees. But I didn't hear the first part of that says, direction received from the board to maintain residential land use at current level. I didn't hear anybody say, keep it there, don't consider reducing that, keep that, but let's lower commercial. The direction I heard was, let's see if we can't get away to reduce impact fees, especially on commercial. Okay. So,
well, just to correct that now, I mean, I was at 2 or 3 different conversations that this board had about that, and the way it's styled in the executive summary, I would not say was inaccurate.
Okay.
So, I think you could. Well, I think you could review the tapes and accurately come up with with the wording that was in the executive summary.
Like I said, if I'm confused quite often, and if you told them not to consider reducing residential fees,
that's not what I said either, Charlie. That's not what I said either. So, you need to be just a little more understanding of how words are used by different people. What I said was, the way they styled it in the executive summary, I think it could be an accurate representation of the conversations that this board has had. So don't say I've said anything else besides that, please. Thank you.
I will ask again. It is to maintain residential land use at current level. That is your direction to the staff?
Land use?
It says,
say that? What page?
The direction received from the Board of County Commissioners is to maintain the residential land use at current
Yeah,
level.
residential land use. You didn't say that the time before that. You said land use, not residential land use.
I just read it anyway.
No, before that you just said land use, not residential land use. But
All right.
the gist of it was to basically keep residential land use roughly the same, but do everything you can consistent with Florida law to reduce the commercial impact fees. That's
I heard the second
part.
part. So I'm fine. Anyway, to the consultants, can you answer the question for me? Appreciate the compliment on what our level of service is and how our fine facilities that we have in our county. When you did the affordable, the achieved level of service, does that mean that you are starting from where we are today, going forward, maintaining that level of service? Here's the reason. Because in some ways, we've had surpluses. So how are you dealing with the surpluses? Is that a credit? Are we starting from just a new level of service? Are we changing the methodology so that we just start today instead of what we adopted in 2005 as the level of service?
I'll give a general answer because I'm not sure I understand the question. The process we deal with is you can't charge for level of service you haven't created. The courts will get you if you don't have an existing level of service and you tell the developers to create a better one off their back. So that's the initial premise. Now, you can have an adopted level of service that's above that. You can have adopted level of service at that. You can have adopted level of service below that. But if you try to charge the development community for a level of service the current people haven't paid for, you got a problem. Now, if you adopt level of service below the existing, what you've achieved, I think you're suspect because you've said, we've achieved it, but we're not going to maintain it. So what we've done is if you've adopted a level of service that's lower than what you've achieved, and you've built some things recently, you've achieved a greater level of service than you had on some of your services 3 or 4 years ago. So what we've done in every case, we never charge more than what you've achieved, and we never, so if you like a better level of service, we can't pay for that for impact fees. And if you've adopted lower than you've achieved, we've used that number. We will not use a number that you have policy right now that says, oh, we want so many building square foot per person. Last 3 or 4 years, you've built a lot of buildings, and you've achieved more than you adopted. Well, we didn't use what you've achieved. We've used what you've adopted because it's lower. So in every case, we protected you in terms of if you happen to achieve something last 3 or 4 years that you had not adopted 3 or 4 years ago, we don't use it. We use your adopted. If you've achieved it and you've adopted it, and you said you achieved it and it's policy, we've used it. If you've adopted a higher number you'd like to achieve, which I'm not sure you've got any, we won't use it. So you can be comfortable that we've been conservative and we've only charged for what is the minimum you've achieved, and we've only put these calculations that if you've achieved better than you historically have adopted, even though you might want to charge for it, we're not going to let you charge for the achieved until you change the adopted. So we feel very comfortable that every level of service we've used is the one that you can utilize and it makes sense. And if you want to change it, you need to go change your comp plan. If you want to charge a higher fee because you've achieved something more than you've adopted, go change your comp plan and then we'll put it in. So I think we've been very careful and we tried to describe in each one of these the difference between what you were 3 years ago and what you adopted and where you currently are, and we've used a lower number. If you've achieved it and you've adopted it, we've used it. If you'd like to charge, if you'd like a better level of service and you've not got there, we won't charge for it. So we feel very comfortable. We understand the court cases over the last 30 years. We understand the definition of level of service, and we've been very careful to put you in a position to where these numbers are defensible.
Thank you. Sir, how far can you exceed the level of service?
You can decide, I don't want to provide but half the parks in the future, I'm going to let it degrade. You can decide you want to do that if you want to as a policy. That's something you can do. We're not charging for anything that you haven't achieved on the ground.
My question basically is if let's say you have 100 acres of parks, and that meets exactly your level of service, okay, and then you go to 200 acres of parks, which is double your level of service. Do you get to keep charging impact fees in the future, even though you're double your level of service?
Parks are a great one. First of all, the level of service, and we're going to help you with your comp plan descriptions. It's the value per acre you've achieved, not the number of acres. And when you get that clarified, probably half of your value has nothing to do with your acreage. It's just something we attach to, and we do a final calculation. If you've got a huge number of ballparks and different assets in those acreage, you have a certain fee. For the same acreage, you could have half as many ballparks, half as many whatever you've got, half the service, and you'll have a lower fee, but you got the same acreage. The fee we're charging is the value of the asset you've created with existing people, with ballparks. Now, what we found over the last 30 years is, especially counties, they move from acreage to facilities. They'll be at 7 or 8 acres per person. But over time, they drop down to 6 acres to 5 acres. But the value actually goes up very dramatically. They built ballparks and softball fields and whatever. The value goes up dramatically. So the fees increase. So you go from 7 acres per thousand to 6 acres per thousand. You go to 5 acres per thousand. But the service you're providing has increased dramatically. So your fees go up. From what he's telling me is that if you want to reconfigure your asset, provide a better service, and you want to make a decision to go from 7 to 5, you've got to reduce your fees. You can't use those fees to build ballparks and fields. It's kind of, to be honest with you, somewhat nonsensical debate. We attach it to the acreage. We calculate the value, so many dollars per person, and you can reconfigure your asset into ballparks and more of a service as you urbanize the county. And the acreage debate about 5 acres or 7 acres is somewhat nonsensical to me. But so we've charged the value of what you've achieved. And what happened to you, you charge an impact fee and you'll use a tax. Guess what happens to the value? It goes up. 3 years from now, you can go, oh, the value's up, the ballparks are up. We could charge a higher fee, but we don't want to, and you don't. Or you can say, we're going to quit using taxes, and we're going to start using fees. You can do that. You can't charge for more than what you've achieved. Whatever you achieved, moving forward is what you can charge. And we're very clear about that. We've defined it. We've shown the asset value. We've shown the cost per person. And it's land, it's facilities, it's all those things. And we come up with a cost per person. And have a discussion about you're not allowed to reduce your acreage as you reconfigure your asset and still charge fees. It would be like going to the judge and saying, once you pass an impact fee, there's this nonsensical process we got to go through, and now we can't manage anymore. No judge is going to tell you that you can't manage your asset, reconfigure it. You can go from 2 base fire station to 3 base fire stations without adding a fire station. The square footage has gone up, number of people per station, and so you're going to go to court to go, you can't go to 3 base stations, you have to build stations because your standard is stations. No, it's not. It's the total asset value. It's the total number of pieces of equipment. It's the total process. And so we're saying to you, we've calculated it. You have a right to charge for that asset, and you have a right to configure it without getting tied up with some kind of conversation about the number you've tied to it, whether it's a fire station or whether it's an acre or whether it's a mile road.
Is there a way of making that clear versus it being a moving target? Because we have spent a lot of time hearing from Mr. Wilson, clearly more as a critic of the process of our calculations of staff and how we interpret and how all that works. And if there's a way in this report of making it state, and maybe it already does, but it state this is what we're
somewhat.
I mean, so that everybody can go basically to the end of how we calculate and look at it. And then if they want to debate how we calculate, that's fine. But at least we all know what the formula is that we put in there and the answer that we have. And that way, if they want to attack that formula, we can debate that. But right now, we're debating on whether we're using acres or the value of the asset. And
we'll do it in both a report, and what we need to do is help you with your comp plan, to where you modify your standards and narrative in the comp plan to where you just don't go say acres. You go, it's the total value and the service delivery, and it's a certain dollar value, and that's what we're going to try to maintain and achieve. And the comp plan needs to say we may transition from fewer acres, but the asset value may actually increase because we're spending taxes. And if we want to stop spending taxes and push that you have that option. So we'll try to beef that up a little bit more in the report, and we're clearly going to give you some advice in terms of when you do your comp plan, because the two really need to be tied together. Whatever we say in the report needs to be modified in some of your policy statements in your comp plan. Okay. But we'll be glad to do that, and we feel very comfortable that this is something we can help you with.
I think maybe asking the question that Mr. Wilson asked in a different fashion that's easier for me to understand. Using the jail, we have a wing of the jail that's empty, so we know we don't need to collect fees to build a new jail because we have excess capacity. So if you apply that same thinking but to parks and you have excess park capacity, or if you do, if you do, then at what point do you not charge park capacity till you burn up some of that excess capacity, and then at some point in the future the fee goes back into? That goes back to the idea of a formula of you have this much capacity available, we're absorbing it at X rate. At some point you don't need to charge the fee, and at some point you do need to charge the fee. So it's easier to understand on jail bed capacity, but can you apply that same theory to parks or something else?
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. I'll give you one quick example. Your current jail asset, if for some reason you wanted to computerize everything to increase the throughput, if for some reason you had to do a lot of investment and the value of that jail is going to change tremendously per bed, you can absorb that, quote, excess capacity in bed and reconfigure it to where your throughput's much better and your capacity is much better. The bed's the bed, and I know there's some, quote, excess capacity in beds, but I've seen, and libraries are going to be an example, libraries are going to not increase square footages, but libraries are going to get more expensive because of the type of services they provide. Based on this, you can't take that square footage and increase the throughput and the technology in the libraries, because if you don't increase the square footage, you can't have fees. And it's a decision you at least ought to be allowed to make, that, yeah, it's tied to square footage of libraries, but there's books and there's technology and whatever. So we'll write something up for any one of these. You absolutely have the right as a policymaker to reconfigure the service delivery and not attach it to one square foot of building or a square foot of or acres of parks. This is a fee based on the value of the service you're developing, and we're just tying it to one of the measurements that's going to change in value. And we'll write that up, and we can give examples almost on every one of them. I mentioned fire stations. You may not increase the number of fire stations, but you'll increase the number of bays. So do you need to change your standard to bays? Because somebody's going to say you got one station for 10,000 people or so many square feet. So we'll write something up, but it's every one of these. I mean, I feel very comfortable that impact fees laws are not going to be written to where as soon as you try to make a practical decision about delivering service, you have to stop charging impact fees. And that's what this argument ends up being, is somewhat, if you tie it to some measurement and so in excess, you got to quit. And the answer is no, you don't. You need to be reasonable, you need to be proportional, and we need to show the asset value, and the delivery of service needs to be identified. And so we'll write that up in the report, and we'll help you with your comp plan to make sure that concept is understood.
Okay, well, at the current time, it is not in the comp plan, and we are under this report right here, which was 2005. And in 2005, what was adopted are levels of service, and they are based upon certain measuring sticks. And in the case of parks, it is acres. Now, acres, just like in the case of law enforcement, it is law enforcement officers. However, that doesn't mean that's how much a law enforcement officer is, because there's all the expenses of a law enforcement officer, including their car and their equipment and their administrative buildings, are all figured into the cost per unit, and that's how the fees were established back in 2005. And that's one of the things that I see, is that we're looking at this report in a vacuum. You have to remember, one of the best ways to figure out where you're going is to figure out where you came from. And so one of the questions to you as a policy group, as an example, is just what the gentleman just finished explaining to me. And let's say, so is it a better policy to have 100 acres of parks that are highly developed with every kind of modern technology, or is it better to have 1,000 acres of open land parks? So sure, you can continue to spend all of your money improving what the current place that you have, or you can spend it to increase your capacity, which, if you'll remember, is the basis for an impact fee, is increased capacity. And using that example, so far, we haven't even been able to tell what our capacity is of parks. Under the 2005 study, which is right here, we had 586.28 acres of parks. According to the new study, which is today, right here, we have 546.65 acres of parks. We have 40 acres of parks less than we had in 2005, and we've spent how many millions of dollars? The comp plan says there's 1,528 acres of parks, and the memo that I have from the staff says that the table at the comp plan is correct with 697 acres of parks. So taking any of those numbers, if it goes back to the population figures, just like Tyndall Oliver said, it has to, the whole formula is based on population. So if you take the population, unincorporated population of Indian River County, and so I can multiply, let's say it's 90,000, okay, and you've got a level of service of 6, that means you have 540 acres. That's how it came up. And the way the 6 was determined was because it added up what all the costs were to be able to buy a park. And it included all the things on top of the park. It included equipment. Just like when you do libraries, it included computers. So they came up with a cost. And if you take all those costs, excluding traffic, because I didn't even try to tackle traffic, I personally think a mobility system, a mobility fee to replace the impact fee is probably a very good system. But because you don't live as far out as I do. Because I don't live as far out as my friend Wesley does. But,
Wesley, you're in trouble now.
I know. But if you take the costs per thousand of all of those things, it comes out to $2 million. For every 1,000 people, you are charging just over $2 million in impact fees for all of these categories, excluding traffic. Now, that means if you miss the population number by 10,000, you have overcharged them $20 million. I can show you that our countywide fund in 2000, the estimate for countywide in 2020 was $189,000 for 2020. That was adopted in the 2005 study, was $189,924. According to this study, adjusted for the census, the new estimate for 2020 countywide is 157,705, which is a 22,000 person difference. We overestimated. It's not their fault. Nobody knew what was going to happen. But we have overestimated and we have overcharged by the tune of over 20,000 people, which totals $41,440,000 we have overcharged over the last 10 years. And the reason that our friend here can tell us that we have really good levels of service is because adding traffic and solid waste, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million that we have overcharged over the last 14 years. So now what do we do with that $50 million that we've overcharged? We start over. We start over with a different method. Those times, think of yourself as driving down the road, because one of the things impact fee says is you must maintain your level of service. Not increase your level of service, maintain your level of service. The reason we're able to charge impact fees is to maintain the level of service adopted in 2005 by you. Okay? And what we have not done so. We have exceeded that level of service, and so the question is, are we starting all over? Is there a credit in here for cash on hand? Is there a credit in here for surplus? Now, Mr. Baird will tell you that they need additional monies for public buildings. But if you look at the spreadsheet, you've got 100,000 square feet in excess of public buildings. Now, why do you need more money? Because you just put in the comp plan more money for courtrooms. You know why you need more courtrooms? Because you spend it right here in this building we're standing in. So the reason that we have to keep taking money, and the reason it's a bad idea to change from something measurable to something, but basically what's happened here, what's going on, and we'll debate this at length another time, because they had 3 hours and I'm getting ready to go, but is The more you paid, the more we spent, the more the asset is worth. And when they say, okay, now we're going to do replacement value for the assets you have, it's because we spent so much money. Now in the future, they get to get more money. Okay? So what we have done here is we've changed the methodology, we've changed the starting point, we've changed the way we adopted the plan. Now, even say, okay, Charlie, you're just all wrong. There's one more thing that we have to be concerned about, and that is, can you tell me this alternative method, or I'm sorry, it's not an alternative method, it's a affordable method? Is that right? Has any court weighed in on the acceptability of this as a method?
I have read every court case since 1985. I'm using a lawyer who has read every court case, and until there is a court case, we're all having to take prior court cases, and what we're proposing is consistent with every court case that's happened to date. I can't tell you about what a court's going to do that hasn't convened.
Okay, then let me ask the question. What would happen if a court did convene and we have started collecting all this money and we had collected over our level of service and he found against you? What would happen then? Would the county then be liable to repay the money that they've collected?
In the 28 years I've been doing business, that hasn't happened. I don't know what to tell you about if it's ever going to happen. I'm not going to guarantee anybody it's not going to happen. I can just tell you I know all the court cases. I've been doing the studies for 28 years. I'm working with a lawyer, and we're telling you that we feel comfortable with what we're moving forward to, and that's all we can do for you.
Well, that's a good idea. I'm not trying to be more difficult than normal, but I have lawyers also, and one of the things that they tell me, because they've read some of these also, is I believe there are a couple of counties. I thought it was Lee County, could be Dunedin. No, south of Dunedin. Anyway, that have actually had to pay this money back. And
then south to Collier.
There are several that have.
That was over the different. That's where they were taking land from developer to not paying for it. Total different thing, Charlie.
Budget. There's another case called budget. Well, we'll let the lawyers do that. I'm not going to argue law with Joe Barry.
Well, I mean, get the fact. You've got to have the facts. The facts the lawyers argued were different.
I'm not going to argue with you. The budget hotel case, as an example, required two things. And one of the things that it did was it prohibited land banking. And its case said you must be able to do this in the foreseeable and near future. Okay? So if I paid an impact fee 5 years ago, okay, and I have an excess of service now, and I have another development that comes in, where do you prove the need? Because you have to, in order to do this, the very basic thing here is you have to prove the need. Not the want, not we'd like to do that, not it'll be really nice. You have to prove the need. And the need is based upon your adopted level of service, which is this right here. And when we went through this, the presentation that was up in the screen, one of the things we saw is that in some of these areas, there is not a need that will pass, in our opinion, that will pass muster. And if we have a disagreement about what the law is, there's one way to find out, and that's a court case. Okay. Now, I know y'all aren't afraid of court cases. It happens to you all the time. It's not your money. You got a whole raft of lawyers that doesn't make any difference. But the fact is what there was a county, I think it's Anne Arundel County, I believe it was in California, that ended up having to pay $4.7 million back, plus court case, plus legal fees, plus interest. The point is that if you make a mistake and you don't have clear legal direction, then just be prepared, because there's a possibility, even if it's just a slim possibility, there's a possibility you're going to have to pay this money back. Okay? So my point is that as we get more in depth with all these things, I don't believe that we have clear legal direction, and I believe that you have some very difficult situations with the data that's been used, particularly the population data. You do have a huge, in some cases, surplus, and I don't know what you're going to do about those. I don't see any credit for cash on hand. I don't see any credit for surpluses. We're just kind of starting over. It's like it's like having your credit card go, okay, well, we owe you a $1,000 refund, but we'll just start from zero, and you can charge anything you want. Yeah. So, gentlemen, this is going to be a long process. I would like to have some opportunity to be able to have I wrote a couple of months ago to Tyndall Oliver and asked if I could speak to them after they got their draft done, so I could ask these questions individually and perhaps have a little more direction. But we haven't been able to put that together. So when we get to the other workshops, if you're going to have other workshops, we really need to go more in depth into the very basic reason that we've collected these. Who pays? Do we really want to do this? Because the people that pay are employers, homeowners with mortgages, and people with vacant land. That's who pays impact fees. A homeowner, for you to get your $10,000, and a homeowner puts it in his homeowner's, it usually goes into his mortgage. Over the term of that mortgage, that homeowner is going to pay more than $20,000. That homeowner pays. And it affects the people who can buy a home. So I have a lot of questions. If there's a way, and I won't bother you any longer, but I am a critic, and I don't think you should be doing this, and I don't think you have a basis for doing this, and I think if you really were fair about what's happened so far, instead of just trying to take the money, I understand why you do it, but I think you should give the public a fair chance. You've taken the profits of an entire industry for 10 years. The reason you have profits is because they'll get you through the bad years. Well, they didn't have profits for 10 years because you had their profits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
In between, just to follow up on one, on the comp plan, at one of the Florida Association of Counties programs that you go through as a new commissioner, one of the instructors of the class was a University of Florida professor that did a whole segment on comp plan, population projection, and he pointed out some pretty significant overestimating, not intentional, but just if looking at Florida statewide, that the double-digit percentage of factoring in population that's not going to come in the next 50 or 75 years, and we're gearing up for a population that's not going to actually happen. And maybe one part of this that we need to look at, and I'm sure he's available through Florida Association of Counties because we're part of that group, is to have him do the talk on comp plan, because it really opened up this potential overcapacity we're building into this and other things, not just for here, but other areas of the state, to look at how we're projecting out our comp plan numbers, and if they're too low, they need to be up, or if they're too high, they need to just be as accurate as they can be. And he had some very good data through University of Florida and FAC, and I'll get the name of that instructor for you, that maybe have a conversation with him.
We did adjust our population growth figures down for this study. Yeah, we did substantially from when the boom was. Okay.
If I could just make a comment, population used for planning purposes is one thing. Mm-hmm. What we charge and have always charged for impact fees is another. It's always been consumption-based. It's always been a conservative amount. So we've never charged anyone more than what they consumed with the new development. And we've used a conservative number. So regardless of population projections, and they're always wrong, they're projections. They're like any other kind of projection, and they're always being adjusted. For planning purposes, whether you're planning revenues or looking at what might be coming in and so forth, certainly you need those accurate. And we are making those accurate, but it's never had, no pun intended, it's never had an impact on our impact fee.
I think in general discussion, when people say your projected population is going to be X, it can be used as a tool to be for or against something because of population forecasting that may not be right. But there may be something that we can learn from this fellow's presentation that he did.
I can make two sentences just maybe because me ought to go on record. Number one, in 05, it was the same methodology. I want to make it very clear. It was asset-based. It was not, it's a standard because we attached to something that was asset-based. We charged not $1 more than the value of the asset. So when you add population, you could not have increased the value of your system more than that
Right.
average
Okay.
because it was asset-based. So all your improvement level service wave you did were done with taxes, not fees. So make it really clear, 05 and this one is there's no difference in the methodology. It did not change. It was asset-based. And so that's one statement. I'll be sure you understand the two methodologies have not changed from 05 to now. The second one is population projections had nothing to do with the fee level. Zero. Nothing to do with it. We said, this is your asset, this is the value. If your population had gone up really fast, your revenues would have been up. If you had nobody pulled a permit, you wouldn't have collected $1. So the one, it was the same methodology, and two, it had nothing to do with the population projections. It was the current population at that time and the assets. So I want to make sure those two statements are real clear. It was asset-based then, it's asset-based now, methodology hasn't changed, and population projections had nothing to do with the effect of the fee. And I think it's just kind of important to at least get those two items on the record.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
My name's Peter Robinson. I'm with Laurel Homes, and I live at 315 Great Twig Road in Vero Beach. And all I want to say about the population projections, if they're wrong, just blame it on Bob Keating. Real simple way to solve that problem. Okay, but the only other thing I'd like to ask is that when you're putting all this stuff up on the website where we can grab it, if you have those neat little graphs that show, how you came up with your little Affordable Growth Act, if you could put the spreadsheet that created that graph so that we could look at what those numbers are, it would be a lot easier than just looking at this interesting little, drawing that you have. And then also the other thing that I think would be good to have is the next 3 years on each of these items you're going to spend some money supposedly. Okay? If you would put the actual item you're going to do, it's kind of like I hope to build 10 houses, If I can tell you how much each one of those little houses would cost. Put the actual item there and put the actual cost and what you're projecting to do. And then we can look at that and see if, Right, but if you make a nice simple spreadsheet for the next 3 years, I mean, this thing we're fighting about 3 years. I can go over and read your comp plan. You know how it goes. I know how you do this, Joe. You hide a little over here and a little over there, and us poor guys, we can't read fast enough. We're kind of dumb. We're just dumb, But we can put it in one simple spreadsheet. Then we can find it, and we know what's going on. Okay, thank you very much.
I'll have Jason get that stuff to you.
I know Jason does everything. He's good.
Thank you, Peter.
Yep.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Evening, almost, I guess.
Peter Van Rens, Kimley Horn & Associates, Vero Beach. Actually here on behalf of McDonald's today, so happy to hear it's been part of the discussions so far. A couple things. Very happy, being in the business and on behalf of them that you're going in this direction. Even the $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 difference in the project makes a difference in whether they might move forward with something. So it's a great direction. One thing that hasn't been discussed, and I just wanted to bring up, is portability with impact fees. I don't know if that's something that could be looked at. McDonald's in particular has a situation where they want to move by the outlet malls over from the west side of 95 to the east side of 95. Could impact fees be transferred from property to property, either under the same ownership or within a certain area between different owners? I know Smyrna Beach, for example, has almost like a credit market where you can, in a certain area, you can buy credits, impact fee credits from other properties that may have overpaid or something. So it makes a financial impact to the current project moving forward. So just a suggestion on their behalf to consider.
I think that's a great suggestion. And just to go back to the meeting we had on Tuesday, that's exactly what we were talking about with the TMDL credits. So I think it's a very good idea, and it's the type of thing that could stimulate development that we're not thinking about, just because the private sector can make better use of one area rather than another area with the basic same impact to the public. So,
And that's an implementation issue that we can discuss, and we know it's been brought up before. I think from a transportation or traffic standpoint, if it's not very close, obviously it will affect different links, and there's a whole different analysis that would need to be done. So it may be very limited in where and when it could be done or be practical, but it's something we could look at.
And just for your information, I brought up, that was my item number 9 of the 10 preliminary questions I sent to staff, not just because of them, and I frequent a number of their places. When you have kids and Happy Meals, the new toy, you got to hit the drive-through.
You're using the kids as an excuse.
Well, yeah. I prefer the
Jackie,
chocolate
he
chip.
uses the kids, and it's all family.
But there's other scenarios where, and I know it worked out well. Don's Import Auto bought the adjoining lot to his, so he could. I think he did a temporary unity, a title, so he could take the fees from the one building, apply them to the other one, then tear the other one down. Right. But when you have a space between the lots that may be a block down the road or around the corner, if he didn't have that, that would have been a little trickier to do. But some type of portability of capacity that you have, and maybe you have to interimly bond it till the other facility is torn down, and you record something on that deed so that the future buyer doesn't think he's buying the property that has a bunch of vested credits. So you have to have some disclosure method. But I think some reasonable aspect of portability within a district or a link that is fair.
Right. And again, that New Smyrna Beach is kind of taking that approach to certain areas of their,
And it's a model we can look at what they've done up there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment at this time? Anybody new from the public that would like to?
I just got one quick question. I meant to ask it earlier. When it's let's say somebody has lived in the community for 20 years and it was a couple. They sell their house and to a family that moves in, and they have 2 children that are driving age and the 2 parents. Now, that's not new. Well, I mean, it's new trips on a road, it's new capacity usage, it's new things of that nature, but it's not new development. It doesn't have an impact fee that's charged to it. How does that, since we've gone through this time with, people losing their homes, people reselling homes and doing all this functionality, I mean, it raises level of service. Is there a formula that works into that as well?
Again, there may be 3 or 4 questions. The fee is charged against a structure, not the average use at any one time. And so you have single person living in a home, you have somebody that's elderly using the home, then they sell it to somebody that's got 4 kids, and we've taken all the homes that it's an average for the structure. And if you start trying to put deed restrictions on people moving and trying to respond to that, I've not seen a solution to it. So that's the basic answer. The average home generates the 8 trips per day. Some generate 6, some generate 12. And over a 30-year period, that home's going to generate 4, 12, 6, 8. But over that 30-year period, recharging the fee is going to do the same. So to date, we've not found a way of creating these unique fees for, 5-year time periods for different occupation levels or uses of the structure. So a single-family home, on the average, we charge a fee for, and we've not found a solution to try to move that fee around and allow people to start in with a lower fee, and then when the other family moves in, increase the fee and get deed restrictions. It gets really complicated, and I've not found anybody not just charging the average structure with a range of impacts.
I have a question for Jason, if he's... When in the credit formula on the roadway segment cost in the credit part, when somebody registers a car in the county here, does all that money go to the state, or does part of that get built into the credit formula of part of a revenue stream, or who gets that money?
That goes to the state, and it's not included in the credit here.
Because I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but Hertz has figured out that Tennessee is the cheapest place to register a car.
Blount County.
Blount County.
Yeah.
That's where they come from.
That town has got to be flushed with cash, or that state, because there's tens of thousands of rental, and they all are doing it because it's the cheapest place to register a car. Sure. And I just want to make sure we weren't missing out on any revenue side there. Also, on one other question, it comes up more into a category. When you have somebody that's doing a mother-in-law apartment or mother-in-law attachment, and the primary house is greater than 2,500 square feet, but if the mother-in-law suite has a second kitchen in it, they have to then pay a secondary rate, even though it's under the same continuous roof or connected on the same piece of property. I don't think that's necessarily fair, because you could go out and build a 7,000 square foot house and only pay the same fee, and you may have a cabana kitchen and a summer kitchen and an inside kitchen and a who knows what else. that as long as it's under the same roof, use the square footage guideline and not charge them essentially twice. And I think in that one instance we had spoke about, you charge the over $2,500 for the main house, and then because the mother-in-law unit had a kitchenette in it, they then paid the appropriate fee for that size dwelling, even though the first fee paid covered greater than $2,500. You think it would have just covered the whole scenario.
I didn't know we allowed mother kitchens, because I know I have a lot of complaints that we don't allow kitchens when coming. If it's single family and there's a kitchen in another guest house, we do not allow it, because I have people screaming at me on the phone all the time about that.
Right.
So,
We do have a category, and we have fewer than 20 that we've done since 1992 when we put it in as an affordable housing provision. We do have allowances. If you have a certain size lot, you can do attached to your single. It could be attached or detached, an accessory dwelling unit. It's a mother-in-law cottage, and it can have its own address, its own utilities. It doesn't have to be a relative. It can be rented out. And it's limited in size, less than 750 square feet under air.
Right.
But it has all the components of a separate dwelling. And like I said, again, we have less than 20, fewer than 20 in the county over the years that have been built like that. And they are assessed the same impact fee as a multifamily unit in our code. And that's because they are addressed and treated as a separate unit. Again, they can be rented out separately. They could be attached. Most of them that we do have been detached. And there's some safeguards for making it not look like a duplex and so forth. So it's a limited sort of circumstance. But if you were to put on a bedroom wing and have bathrooms and bedroom, but not have all the components of a dwelling unit, separate entrance and exit and kitchen, then it would all be a part of the one house. So I'm not sure how many instances we have
It's not
where the scenario that you're talking about does come up. But we, if it functions as a single household, we treat it as a single household. If it has all the components of two separate units, we charge it a multifamily rate, which is about half of single family.
Right. I could see if it was two detached structures, but this one was under the same roof.
And if it had separate entrances and so forth, it's essentially, in essence, like a duplex, and you've got a unit on each side. We charge the smaller unit the smaller impact fee.
Right. It was a lesser amount, so I think it's kind of double dipping when you're already paying the over $2,500, but I get your logic.
With an additional capacity, additional fire threat, additional burden upon services, I believe it's most appropriate to add that burden.
Well, I think yes, but when you have a 7,500 square foot house that may have 9 bedrooms and 11 bathrooms, and he's paying $2,500 and over, and then you got a guy that's $2,800 and he's got a 450 square foot mother-in-law apartment attached to the house to help provide care, and then he's got to pay twice, just seems inequitable. But it does, fortunately, doesn't happen that much. Maybe that's partially why, is because you got to pay twice.
And again, the unit has its own life, and it gets used. It won't, again, if it can be rented out as a separate unit, that's going to happen eventually over time.
Okay. Is there any other comments from the public? Okay. Seeing none, Commissioner Fleischer, you had mentioned you might have some wrap-up comments?
I think we want to wrap up. I'm very eager to know that we're going to have additional public input. The public will have the time to review, that this will all be made available. This is going to be posted as well, the PowerPoint as well. I believe that the different organizations are going to need some time to review it, and I did not anticipate that we would. I had hoped we would. Since we will, let's further those comments for another day.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Slaughter?
I just want to thank everybody for this. I mean, this was actually a lot more fun than I expected. I'm going home happy and knowing more than I came, so I'm pleased as punch. Thank you.
Commissioner Zorn?
No, I think a lot of good things have been brought up today, everything from portability. I like to see in our language some alternative method for somebody that, again, using Linus Cadillac as an example, when that comes up, some other entity they can go to that they don't have to pay a fee to kind of express their case and have that committee or board or entity, or maybe it's we wear those hats for those unique circumstances when it comes up, but some non-costly method that deters somebody from challenging something because the fee to challenge is greater than the benefit that they might potentially receive.
Right, and that's one of those implementation type of issues, and there are answers for that, but that's for another day.
Okay.
Okay, good. Steve, I'd like to thank you. And was it Eva?
Negan.
Meenan, okay, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
wrote it down wrong. Thank you all very much for being here and your input. Stan, I think you and Jason and Joe, you've got clear direction on what the board would like you to do as far as making this information available and conducting some smaller working groups with the different industry groups, and then we'll get back together in a more informal workshop in Conference B and continue to disseminate the information.
We'll certainly do that, Mr. Chairman. And is it safe to say it's a consensus of the board that this affordable growth approach is something worth pursuing? Do you all still want to look at the type of approach we're doing, looking at non-residential essentially being bought down? Is there any change in that direction?
Well, I like that it's lowering the commercial. I'd like, if there's a way to lower everyone's and lower some job creation a lot or make them go away.
Right. And you don't have to decide that today, that
Right.
you may want to target some things. I understand.
And my friend Charlie Wilson did have one point, that if there are things that we just don't need, additional capacity for 5 or 6 more years, let's not charge an impact fee. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it also haven't seen anything where it's actually been addressed.
Staff has something that might address that.
Okay, I don't need to see that right now. I would like to see it. I mean, I certainly would like to make sure that we're not taking impact fees for things that we already have more capacity or more use for than we could need for the next few years.
Okay, for example, libraries. Okay, there's a fee that's recommended there. We don't have a major library improvement on the CIP over the next 5 years. We may have some things that we need to do, but they may not rise to the level of us building another branch. I don't see us building a fourth branch library.
As Steve said, I mean, it may be that you increase the use of a library so much, but I can understand that. But I don't want to take the impact fees if we're not going to be adding real capacity for 5 or 6 years. That's
right.
all.
And I think it kind of goes to maybe Peter Robinson's point of that. If we're going to generate a certain amount of impact fee revenues, what are we going to do with that? If we don't have a need for those revenues, and that's what we're looking at is maybe a kind of a staff's recommendation that takes the affordable growth model, but in an instance, say like libraries, if we don't have a substantial one, that we may be able to discount that further, and if we anticipate those revenues will fund the smaller improvements that we may have, for example, that we may be able to recommend a lower fee than the affordable growth.
Yeah, because of the MPO and the time we spent there, I'm convinced that we will spend every impact fee dollar we take for transportation and appropriately. But I don't have the same level of comfort for the other impact fees. That's all I want to end up with at the end of the day.
Yep. And Stan, your comment, I'm happy with the overall methodology. I still have a little concerns relying too much on revenue streams that I see might be shaky. But as far as lowering the non-residential, I think we're moving in the right direction. And as far as residential, if it's up 1% or down 1%, I'm not going to be too worried about that. But I just want to make sure we do have the revenue to meet the demand we have. But the overall, I think the path we're following is what the board wanted, is to find ways to reduce the non-residential, and then the residential side is going to tick a little bit with the numbers. But Mr. Robinson.
Can I just say where he mentioned you like the affordable growth? I think you might want to get a better name because it reminds me too much of the Affordable Care Act. And you might want to come up with a little better name.
If you have your impact fee, you can keep your impact fee.
You might want to come up.
You like your impact fee, you can keep it.
You'll have a choice.
Different name would be my only recommendation.
I'd like to take an opportunity to thank the consultants and staff. Phil didn't say much, Phil Mattson, but he contributed huge to this process, and he didn't say much, but behind the scenes he just contributed a whole lot, and Jason and Stan and the consultant. I think they did a tremendous job.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, so no further business before the commission. We will adjourn.